Well, you made it out again.
Hi.
You made it out again.
Hello, neighbor.
Hello.
We can double check that.
I waved. You walked by and you waved. I wasn't gonna come say hi at 7 in the morning on a
We'll have to
Sunday.
double check that though.
I wouldn't be up at 7 in
That's
the
what I'm
morning.
saying. That's why we just, I go, that's where Jeannie lives. We just waved and
I
went.
know, yeah, well, that's good.
Everybody knows why. We want to take
Well, I hope I don't.
I'm a night owl, I don't go to bed till all hours, so.
Try to be
My
quiet.
boy's that way.
And
Is that right?
Oh yeah, if we'd let him, he'd stay up till 1. And then if we'd let him, he'd get up at 1.
Well, that's, I can't do that.
you're right, so you're right, it would be P. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, just when we get to that, just mention that, make that
So I
comment.
finally got a new pair of
We
boots.
can amend the minutes for
I
that.
had boots from the time I was
Yeah.
could walk,
Yeah, there's
and
a lot
then I wore through them all, and I couldn't find any because they're all made somewhere else.
What is it?
And we went to Nashville this weekend, and I finally got a new pair of boots.
Your souvenir of Nashville.
Oh.
New pair of boots.
I got 2.
Laurel's gonna say something.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, he's already said he's gonna be a half hour late. He said that.
It's
All
fine,
right.
because we need to do it regardless, so it's fine, yeah.
Call to order. Agenda. Call to order. Roll call, please.
Jeannie Carlson. David Langworthy.
He sent us an email saying he'll be about a half an hour late.
Mark Nelson.
Here.
Laurel Preston.
Here.
Randy Reeves.
Here.
Sean Schubring.
Present.
Nicole Truitt.
Here.
Announcements.
Got a couple of minor ones and one big one for you. On the minor ones, just let you guys know that the council passed the ordinance on the text procedures, and they also passed the sign code. They actually did adopt a light standard. Actually, it was a combination of performance, and they adopted a, what was it? It was a candlelight per square foot standard that was based on an average from Arizona and stuff. So that's done, and we are completed with that. Yay. I also wanted to note too, because we got it later in tonight, because I've already heard some comments back about one of the discussions that came up on council regarding construction mitigation and quasi-judicial. I hope we get to it tonight, talking about CMP. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but just know that council has not made any decisions on that. That was just something that the mayor brought up. There really wasn't a whole lot of discussion on if you listen to the minutes. So on to the big news. The big news is I'm leaving Medina. So this is going to be my last meeting. Well, next week with the open house will be my last meeting with you guys.
So you're independently wealth retiring, or where are you going?
No, I am going to be the Director of Development Services over there for the city of Woodinville. Woodinville. Yep, start there. My last day here will be May 11th, and my first day in Woodinville is what I think it's the 14th the following week. So we're right now working, figuring out how to transition, and that's going to include, because I won't necessarily be available here, so how that's going to work with the Planning Commission, just stay tuned, because I'm not quite sure how. The construction mitigation plans, whether I'm here or not, have to continue forward because those have timelines on them. Some of these other items, we'll figure something out, and so we'll keep you informed on how that goes. So,
Well, I'll say it first. Thank you for your time and a lot of lessons. I mean, I learned a lot. All the way from you walked into a messy situation, me trying to build a house, to it was made a mess, to all the hurdles that they gave me that were incorrect, and then you correcting me, and me getting frustrated about it. But I got the house done, and all of this, the years in this, thank you.
yeah. Well, it's been fun. I've been here over 10 years. 10 years in, I guess, about a month or two now. So, yeah, just new challenge, new adventures. So, yeah, it'll be a bigger jurisdiction, kind of going back and doing commercial stuff a little bit, which I haven't done in years. So,
10 and a half.
what's that? Yeah, well, about 10 and a half, yes.
Well, you know, wish you the very best, Robert.
All right, thank you.
But my, we're gonna miss you.
Well, I'm going to miss everybody here, and Kristen can tell you, I mean, you know, I've actually for about the last year felt like my time was kind of coming to an end here for at least the last year, but it's been always hard. It's been hard to want to separate from everybody here because I love the people I work with here so much, and in that it's also included the planning commissions I've worked with here over the years, and for the most part, the council too. There's been some exceptions, but for the most part, the council as well. And I can say that because I'm leaving. So, but
Here.
what's that?
And they're not here.
Well, even if they were here, I'm fine saying it too.
They can listen to the recording.
But anyway, it's been a pleasure, and I've learned a lot while I've been here too. And like I said, it's actually career-wise, this has been, you know, one of the it's been the most satisfying this point in my life as far as career-wise. This has been the most satisfying job I've ever had. So anyway, and that's a tribute to people I've worked with and everything. So I also put a big thank you out to everybody that's been all part of my journey here too.
So the king is dead. Any idea who the new king's gonna be?
We're talking potentially the current building official may step in as Director of Development Services. That's all still being worked out because he's not going to be able to actually run Planning Commission if that happens. So there's a lot of things, there are a lot of moving parts and stuff that we're going to have to take a look at, or they're going to have to take a look at. So like I said, just stay tuned. We will keep you informed as, or the city manager, if I'm not here, we'll do our best to keep you guys informed as this kind of moves forward. So, and by the way, don't forget open house Wednesday next week. We'll talk a little bit more when we get to the amendments and stuff here too. So that's all my announcements.
That's a big one.
There should have been, it looks really small on here. Approval of minutes. Any discussion?
I have
I
one.
have a correction.
You spoke first. Go, Mark.
We probably saw the same one.
Probably. It's under public hearings, the quasi judicial part of the report. Motion by Reeves, second by Nelson, but I couldn't have because I recused myself from that process.
I think we all know this.
Well,
Does anybody remember who, I have the note, but I don't have them here. Does anybody recall who made that
I don't.
second?
Yeah, because
Yeah, I know you
I generally don't second any of them anymore.
Don't put my name in, I
no,
don't care.
I have the notes. We'll go back and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is that the same one you did?
Maybe I had that date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, I
Just don't remember.
haven't had a chance yet.
And there's another note
An
you have.
additional correction to that same couple of sentences. It says that we added condition 2G, but it was actually P.
One last correction in the.
No
quasi-
more action minutes.
Boy, somebody was sleeping.
In that same, the quasi judicial section, Commissioner Reeves disclosed he knows the contractor, comma, Jason Williams, so it's Williams with an S. And I might want to add to that because
Did you say Jason?
Williams.
No
He's
S,
got it right on
is
the
that what you
bottom.
said?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're missing an S, but you may want to add to that just for the record that I know him, but he also, his company with Paul Sad did a remodel of my home.
Yeah, this is what
Many
we've got
years
there,
ago,
keeping it
but-
simple.
But
Good work.
just, but for keeping it simple, thank you.
Any other discussion? All for approving the minutes?
Right?
Aye. Against?
Did we have a motion to, I mean,
Well, we
somebody
had the
said a
three-
correction,
Three
but
corrections.
who made the motion to?
So I'm moved to approve with the three corrections,
Move to approve the minutes with the
with
three
the
corrections.
three corrections.
Second.
Okay, Nelson? Reeves, Nelson, R. Reeves, and Nelson.
No more action
S
minutes.
on Reeves.
Is that really going to confuse you now?
No. Thank you.
We still need to vote again?
I think we got it.
We got it, okay.
Thank you.
Audience participation. At this time, citizens may address the planning commission regarding any issue related to planning commission business, excluding public hearings. To ensure equal opportunity for public to comment, a speaker's comments may be limited to 3 minutes per person per meeting. Do you have any speaker cards?
I have one speaker card regarding code amendments.
Okay.
Bill Palmer.
Hello, I'm Bill Palmer, representing St. Thomas School. First of all, I wanted to second everything that's being said here regarding Robert's departure. Thank you very much for all of your help in getting us to this point. We really appreciate it. I know we could have done it this quickly without you, so thank you. Second thing is that the code amendments, we are supportive of it. The only thing that we haven't yet made up our mind about is about the public amenity. There's committee internally that needs to buy off on that, so I can't speak to one way or the other. But other than that, we're ready to go, and I look forward to the opportunity to participate in the public open house that's next week. We've been graciously extended a table, and which we will table, and we very much appreciate that. And we would ask the committee to put the public hearing for these code amendments on the meeting agenda for the May meeting. We have a kind of a construction schedule we need to keep, and we would really appreciate it if we could get this done at the public hearing at the May meeting. So,
Thank you.
that's it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
There's no public hearings, number 5, so. Other business. Discussion of Planning Commission, City County Communications.
Alrighty, so we started, I kind of think I hinted on this a little bit with you guys last week, and I think I've mentioned some stuff before with you, that this kind of started with the new council, where they've been wanting to try to improve communications between the Planning Commission and council. They kind of want to figure out a way to get a better understanding of your thinking and your thoughts and the processes you guys are going through, and try to be able to take that as part of the nuggets that they can learn from, and when they're considering your recommendations, when those are received by them. So what this is an opportunity tonight is a kind of a chance maybe for you guys to kind of have a conversation, because right now what the council wants to do, I mentioned it in here, at Monday, May 21st, they want to have a joint meeting with you. And so this is an opportunity for you all to kind of maybe talk a little bit about your communications and how you think maybe communications with council might be improved or not improved, or what your thoughts and stuff are, so that in preparation for that May meeting, you can then talk with one voice with the council as to what you think works, what you don't think works, any recommendations. Essentially, it's a chance for you to actually, put your voice together here and tell the council what you think about communications, just in general, and ways to improve it.
So the first thing, May 21st, what time and where?
I don't know if we've been given a time, but typically council meetings are anywhere from 5:30 to 6:30. So somewhere in that time frame, they will most likely hold this joint meeting. I don't have a place either, because this room isn't going to hold you. Both. We've found that out from the past, that we actually need another facility to make it work. Because even when we put the tables up here, I mean, if all of you were able to make it, you're looking at 14 people, and that's a lot around the tables in this room. So, because they'll set up a table for it. It won't be like a dais, it'll be like a table set that everybody can sit around. And I think they want to have, I think the mayor and deputy mayor are going to probably want to have, before that, we'll probably want to sit with you and Randy to kind of just go over the conduct and how the meeting would be run. So you'll most likely be getting contacted about that at some time here in not too distant future about that.
Okay.
And just one other, I noted in here, so currently, you can see here, these are the tools currently we have: the Planning Commission work program, the chair's report at the monthly meetings, development services. I also give them a report that's contained in my monthly report, and then city council reviews in every meeting, because they have to approve your minutes. So you guys do an approval, those all go up to council, and then council has to approve them, so they have a chance to read those. There are several council members that also do listen to the recordings, and then you've seen in the past, some of the council members have also even attended the meetings here. And then, when we actually send your stuff up, like your recommendations, we give them, most of the time when we have, like, where you see the whereas clauses, and we can put that all together, that gives them actually a history. It doesn't necessarily give them the details of your specific discussions, But we'll give them like memos and stuff that you've seen, and they'll also see the whereas clauses that kind of gives an outline of the history of your conversations. And so those are the things that we do now, and that we get to them now, so.
So it's pretty much what I've already been seeing. I mean, how much more, other than the meeting and the minutes, they get the minutes?
Yeah, so that's why I said I would recommend you guys having a conversation. Do you think the communications are adequate? Some council members seem to think that they're not. And so that's why I say you guys may want to have this conversation so that you're prepared then to talk with them about what your thoughts and feelings of it are, including a lot of you see what the actions they take when they do get your recommendations. And so it's a chance to communicate that stuff as well, whether you think what they're doing is good, whether you think they can do things better, all that kind of stuff. So again, that's why I'm trying to encourage you. This is a chance for you guys to kind of talk right now, in preparation for this meeting.
Is the closed meeting when we meet with them, or Cindy and Jessica?
I mean, that'll be like they have meetings with the city manager, because city manager will be part of it probably, and often the attorneys in those, because with the agenda meetings, they always meet ahead to set the agenda and that stuff. So that probably, would be, it's not an open meeting, it's just a preparation meeting, because you're not going to talk policy and stuff, it's just prepping for it and how you're going to conduct the meeting. And then, of course, the conversations themselves have to happen in open meeting.
Any other questions about that? For
Comments?
pardon?
Comments?
Comments? Questions?
Well, I think it is a two-way street, and I'm not sure, they'll have to tell us what we're not sending them, but I look back for an example of when we had worked on the view and sunlight ordinance for a long period of time, and the council decided not to accept it. And I don't feel that we really ever heard the rationale, the reasons. I made an assumption, but I never really heard it. And I think that they ought to be able to give us that. I don't think it should have to come through Robert or Kristen or somebody. I think they should get back to us and explain to us when they make decisions that are different than what we have recommended.
I believe it passed the last meeting in 17.
December, and then the new
It
council.
was rescinded the first meeting of 18.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but I think it would have been nicer if they had advised us of what their thinking was, their rationale for it. Because we didn't get it back, we just heard that, it hadn't been accepted.
Yeah,
Do you mean because they disregarded over 12 months of our work?
Well, yes. I thought, they don't have to explain to us, but I think they should give us rationale for why they made the decision.
It would help us
that
in the future to do better also, if we knew what they took exception
Exactly.
to, instead of just,
It
it's
was sort
gone.
of like all of a sudden it just fell out of
Right,
the
and
sky.
I don't believe there's even a,
Well, it did actually almost literally fall out of the sky, because it was a new council, and then they put it on there, and there wasn't even a lot of discussion about it.
there's no current code either.
Yeah, that was one of the other things. So their motion to rescind the view and sunlight ordinance. Also, because the previous, in December, they had rescinded the old one. And so when they rescinded that ordinance, it did not remove the rescinding of 1816. So right now, we have no view and sunlight ordinance whatsoever in any chapters at all. Now, that wasn't the council's understanding when they took action, but that's been the attorney's interpretation of it, so.
I just wanted to make a suggestion in terms of us presenting a common voice to this meeting on the 11th. Perhaps we can take suggestions like this and write a summary of, so we can, one tangible suggestion to encompass what you've suggested, I think would be have at our meetings, in addition to Robert's report, have a member of city council give their, either at the meeting, their verbal report, or prior to the meeting, like a written, plain English report.
Some feedback,
Yeah,
some kind.
and so, what would you prefer? Would you prefer them here physically so we could engage and talk with them, or would you prefer it in written format earlier?
I don't have a preference, I just feel
Okay.
we need feedback, is all
Okay.
I'm thinking. That's an example I could think of if you're looking for communication.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
looking at this list of existing communications and then listening to your comment, I think what is missing in both directions is that rationale piece, or the pros and cons list, or the what did you think through to arrive at this decision list. And I hear that you're saying some of it's captured in the whereases, but I think the whereases kind of build the case for what's been adopted, but don't necessarily present what the case, what the debate was about, or that kind of, and I think those, the minutes don't capture the discussion generally. The minutes say there was discussion, but they don't detail the discussion. So that's not a vehicle for really getting that kind of understanding and that back and forth between the two bodies. And having someone here might be nice. I just feel like that's a lot to ask of a council that's already meeting a couple times a month, and that, I think a written thing could be quite sufficient, and but would be a nice addition, particularly in cases when they've adopted something that's different from what we.
If they're right, I think we could provide a little guidance perhaps, because the report being with the whereas clauses can sometimes be, the true content gets a little lost in the official language, so maybe a plain English report. I would prefer, personally. I don't know where that stands regarding written communications, if it has to be official sounding language, or if plain English is acceptable.
For me, it's they give us a work plan, an annual work plan, and then they throw these little special projects at us. And then it's, okay, this is nice, this little project is nice, but it should be number 11. And then we work through the plan that they already gave us, because we're not getting as much done as we should, because we just shelve all of it and then go to this.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Laurel, I think it's a good idea. Perhaps they could choose how they would prefer to give us the information, because I know they're busy, I understand that, but maybe they
One of
could
the things they're suggesting is having more joint meetings, making those more of a regular occurrence, and I don't know what your thoughts about that are, but that's one of their suggestions, is more joint, so you can have face-to-face. The problem with them coming to the meetings is that it's not the whole council, and you do sometimes have individual council members speaking not on behalf of the council, but on behalf of themselves, and that's a problem. And that was a worry before. Like, I remember when I first got here, there was discussion about council being assigned to the park board and the planning commission. Mark, you may recall this because you were on the council at the time, and I think you wanted to volunteer, and there were some other volunteers, and what came up was concerns that that a council member might go to the board and speak their own interest and their own opinion, and not necessarily on behalf. And of course, we've certainly seen that happen in recent times with council members now. They come in and speak on their own behalf, not on behalf of the entire council.
Is that an allowable thing if they say at the beginning, I'm speaking on behalf of myself, because we're such a small town?
Well, whether it's allowed, there's no law against it. It's really all about how the bodies want to function, how the council wants to function, and how the planning commission wants to function. That's just your own, it's the internal operations of the different groups. But it is a problem. That does happen.
Laurel?
I think my response to joint meetings would be that, it's an additional meeting for everyone involved. And then I think also procedurally, there's value to us independently considering things, and then them independently considering our recommendation. I think that's different than having double the number of people trying to come to consensus at the same time. And while that's an opportunity, I guess, to get things worked out, I somehow my gut feeling is that it's better to keep the discussions independent.
I'll be actually the third already that says you're correct. The reason it's not a joint meeting. I mean, we can go once in a while and get maybe their opinions or guidance, but we need to be autonomous. I agree.
There is this potential inertia towards more control of the planning commission, and they're making it less relevant, and possibly even reducing our ability or the comprehensiveness of our ability to review development regulation, and maybe taking away the quasi-judicial role that we have. So it's really important that this body represents critically, I believe, some checks and balances. And therefore, the independence of this body is, I believe, vitally important as a counterweight. And I'm not necessarily relating this to the current council, but in the future, it could be especially important that this body has its current weight, if you can use that word. So I really want to keep the Planning Commission relevant and independent.
I have a follow-up. I agree with you conceptually. I'm just trying to think about, in terms of tangible impact or request for communications, how that would manifest. So are you saying that potentially joint meetings would undermine that autonomy and that role?
If we're holding meetings with them, why are we there?
I think there's a time and place for joint meetings.
Okay.
But I think that even with one council member here, that can influence our deliberations one way or the other. So a joint meeting is certainly, it's going to be appropriate at certain times and efficient, but it may have unintended consequences.
Mark, you have something? You're the one that's been on both sides,
On both sides.
so.
Yeah. I find that because I attend almost every single council meeting, I know what's going on in the council. And it doesn't always make sense. And I attended the meeting where they approved of the view and sunlight ordinance, and I attended the meeting that they rescinded it. And to me, there was two reasons why it was rescinded. We had two planning commission members that were on council now, the new one, and they voted against it when they were on the planning commission, and they voted against it when they got on the.
No, one flipped. Jen actually voted not to rescind.
Oh, did? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
One, I think, yeah.
But I think there was an influence on the other council members to do that. Then there was also the issue of the lawsuit, right?
That was something that the mayor made an issue out of.
And it seemed like it spread over into the thinking and the thoughts of the other council members to the point.
And it wasn't
where
actually a
everybody-
lawsuit, it was a LUPA appeal. There's a difference because a lawsuit involves a totally different amount of legal work versus what a LUPA. LUPAs are actually streamlined processes for amendment, for challenges.
Yeah, but what the impression I got, my perception of that was that everybody was afraid to go ahead and honor this ordinance that we worked so hard on and the previous council voted for it because there was this threat that suddenly the city could be liable. And I think that they also, was an interpretation of a few at least, that they personally could be liable for that. And they didn't want to take that responsibility on.
Although they were advised by the city attorney otherwise.
I know, but being attorneys.
The former city
themselves,
attorney.
Then they,
Two attorneys on
Yeah.
there.
Former.
Right, but I just want to point out that that was brought up in an argument, but the city attorney did not, actually told them what the law said about it, and they chose to ignore that.
yeah. And I think that, but that's still why that decision was made, so.
So the big,
Anyway, I'm just kind of, holding back on whether or not I think joint meetings are always good. I'd like to find out what,
when was the
why
last one?
we have a
Couple of years
particular, task that we are, assigned to take over, just to get a little bit more feedback from them personally, what they think the goal of that would be. I think that would be valuable, but been around Medina city politics for long enough where it's very rare to have everything go as we planned here, we think we're doing the right thing, it gets up to council, and they have been on planning commission, they think they know better, and so they kick it back or, you know, disregard it altogether, so I've become a little bit calloused about that, and that, it is what it is, and that's what life is, so.
So I think that what we're getting at is every couple of years, a joint meeting, but more than every couple of years, it's not real valuable. Is kind of what I'm feeling. Consensus, yes.
I would suggest maybe like a once-a-year work plan meeting, that would be, because this was my first time through this year, and that felt a little disjointed to me, that we got a list from them, we sent a list back to them, they sent us an amended list, and I think that was one place where it would have been nice to have actually had a dialogue about that and figured out what the priorities are and, you know, just how to allocate our time and attention.
Yeah, we have some stuff on the work plan that was there. We were here the longest, and it was here when we got here. It's never come all the way up because something else gets thrown and curveballs.
I like the idea of you know, an annual meeting to talk about work plan, talk about goals, objectives, why we want to do that, what are the priorities. That could be very valuable.
I'm actually surprised that that's not the current protocol. So there's no standing.
You was with us. We kind of built our work plan, what we think's good, and then it goes, and then usually in the beginning of the year, when I'm there, or Randy would previously, we would say, okay, here's what we think. What do you guys have that's different? And the previous council would move something just because they had to move something.
Yeah.
And then that's what we had. And then something would come out of the left field and it was number one. It's like, well, wait a minute, this is pretty high if it's number one. Maybe that's number 5.
So it
But-
sounds like with one voice, we can say that's a.
I try.
I mean, the challenges you have is that, and this is what's happened in the past, was there wasn't always a willingness for people to give up additional nights for the joint meetings for those. That was one challenge. The other challenge you run into on these things is that there's this, as Sean's pointing out, things have a tendency to get added that, because what happens is somebody brings something up, and I'm going to use the St. Thomas thing for an example. That's not something that anybody was anticipating. And then you had a local entity, the school, came up here wanting to have code changes, and so then suddenly this gets added in, or somebody came in like last year with the
Tennis court.
yeah, with the tennis courts and stuff. So yeah, again, but that's what happens, and that might be part of your conversation. So if you do think it's good to have these study sessions with them to set your work program, maybe that's part of that conversation. Maybe that's part of the conversation you have with them coming up also in May.
Well, I think there's something, ought to be able to differentiate between an individual request and a community asset request. What's the level they're looking at?
I actually disagree. I think it's important for there to be a responsive government, and although it's nice to have a plan, perhaps have like flexibility within it for like 20% for as these things do come up, that we can properly address it in a timely manner. Because we're not all knowing. We don't know what's coming, what'll be a hot button topic for the coming year. So I actually think knowing what's on the work plan, I think it's good that we can be flexible and accommodate
I
these
agree with
kinds of things.
flexibility.
Yeah.
It's just interjection of something that may not be a priority in terms of the whole city.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking.
And the sports court's been the one that's been brought up before, because there really was no rush on that, and yet it became a top priority. And in fact, they only now just came in a year and a half later. They've come in to do the application finally for it.
It was not even a time to
Oh,
build
wow.
that, it was,
Okay.
So that's what she's talking about, because because sometimes it becomes this priority, and yet there's actually time to work on it. Versus like what you're dealing with St. Thomas, they actually have some things that actually do put some parameters around the time frame that you're looking at it. The sports court really didn't have a time frame, but yet the council did put a priority on it.
Thanks for the perspective on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Comments?
Just on the rationale, communicating rationales back and forth, we do have the option to listen to the audio, and they do too. And you're saying So I'm just sitting here thinking about, again, volunteer time commitments and things like that, and is it right to ask anybody, volunteer or staff, to prepare additional written documents when maybe we could just get like a timeline on the audio or something like that, so that you wouldn't have to listen to the whole audio, but they're discussing a certain topic, between minutes 14 and 22 or something like that, and we could
Can you come, because there's
kind
some
of
stuff going on with the
selectively listen.
software.
I think when on this new software that we have, it's the third one in 3 months, when the minutes are done, there's usually like a time, like when it happens. So if you and I don't know how it's put on the website, but I think that if you can, when you're clicking through the audio, it has little time things underneath it.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's.
But that's new, we're.
Yeah, this is a new system.
That's a great
It's
suggestion.
a really good suggestion.
One less technical approach would be like notating the time on the minutes, and then there's a slider bar on the audio, right? You can kind of figure it out for the most part if there were like,
If
say
you
at
have a
8 p.m. and
guideline
is that
Are you talking about council minutes?
on the on the actual minutes? So
I
like
can't
there's
speak for how the
Okay.
council minutes are. They're
Okay.
very, as these minutes, how we do them now, which obviously this wasn't my best first run, but they're action minutes, and so they capture only just the action.
yeah.
But we can certainly, I can talk to the city clerk and see if we can come up with a, so that, because we're trying to keep them all uniform.
Yeah.
So we can just like put the times, because our minutes, how we used to do them, I had times on every single thing.
Okay.
But yeah, I can certainly talk to her and see if we can just, public hearing, 8 o'clock, or, just so
Yeah.
you have a general idea, and you can, as you said, when you go through the audio, it has the little times underneath it, and you can just kind of slide to 8 o'clock, and then instead of listening to 2 hours, you can just listen to maybe 10 minutes or something
Yeah.
like that. So yeah, I can
think it'd be
definitely.
less tech. You don't have to learn a whole new software platform.
Yeah, no, I can definitely talk to her and ask her if we
Yeah.
can get uniform and just start making the times when the discussions had started. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you're gonna have to make those efforts to, that's something you'll have to make the effort, to look at, or to listen to those recordings and stuff, which we're still having a few bugs here and there, so they're still working some things out, but we're trying to get it so, because most places are doing this now, they're trying to get it so that you can easily click onto the recordings and listen to them more and more.
Along those lines, and this is one more thing for Robert or whoever comes next, and Sean, like if before the meeting, before one of our meetings, when the agendas go out, say maybe like give a heads up, make a special note of, you guys should probably listen to the last council meeting discussion on this
We're not
topic.
gonna wanna
Is
try
that
to
too
predict.
much?
Yeah, we're not
Okay,
gonna,
okay.
I mean, you guys can decide for yourself what works best for you, because everybody's
What's that?
I'm
different.
usually at the meetings.
Okay.
Mark and I sit next to each other.
I mean, can that be included in an email to the planning commission prior to, like, the 3 days prior to this meeting when the minutes
What
go
are
out?
what are you asking for the 3 days prior?
Oh,
A
so,
synopsis or?
say for example, something comes up at a council meeting that maybe wasn't even scheduled, that would be relevant to the planning commission. If you were there, you can say, heads up, you might be interested to know this was discussed and it's around this time. I mean, that's,
I mean, we could do something like it, but then it comes right down to my personal opinion as to what I think's important.
yeah,
Not
well,
that-
but you are the chairperson, like, you
Okay,
get to,
no, I'll-
no, I'm saying, like, you get to
I'm-
prioritize the agenda, so that's the,
I will defer to, I think we can, especially with the abbreviated minutes where you can slide across and not listen, we can all
Yeah.
spend the same 15 minutes kind of getting to the parts that we might want to listen to. If you don't really need to listen to going over and, adopting the minutes from last time. It will be just, we can listen to the minutes individually.
I think we need to add that to the duties of the chairman.
Yeah.
I would note that,
Want a full report.
at the beginning of these meetings, when we do announcements, I try to bring up the highlights of the things that I do believe are relevant.
yeah,
And again, you all also able to go to those minutes too, and I keep encouraging this, if you want to email, for example, like if you want to know if something went on at the council, send an email, and or whoever follows me up,
Yeah.
and can end up can put something together, and then hopefully they can send it out to everybody. So if something you saw on the agenda struck you and you'd like to have a little bit more about it and have it shared with the rest of the planning commission
Yeah.
members, send an email to the staff person, whoever it is, and usually we can find some time to try to maybe make a quick synopsis for you that way. But we need to know actually what it is that catches your attention. We don't want to just start assuming things.
Yeah, but so my point being, like, if we have an action item for ourselves and not just action items that we're requesting of the council, that might be a good faith gesture to say, we'll also, make a note of,
I don't really have that much, I just kind of give up, come up in my 1 minute or so of reporting on what we've done.
Okay.
Like today it'll be, or this time, it'll be, we talked about talking with you, will be part of the,
okay.
part of the report.
And it's also a summary in the Development Services monthly report has a summary of the meeting as well, although it's almost.
I mean, I'm already reading these things,
Yeah.
so I just, because I'm cool.
But what you just said is actually the key thing is that, there's lots of materials out there. Grab into it, and then if there's questions, don't hesitate to ask. I mean, all of the staff here, anybody here is happy to answer questions to what extent they can on anything you might have a question about, so.
Maybe internally, as an action item, I'd suggest, if one of us goes to a meeting and finds something particularly interesting for the planning commission, in that time period prior to this meeting, perhaps just make a note of, like, because and Robert does summarize at the beginning of our meetings, but it is also nice to have that opportunity to listen to the audio. So if one among us, we should feel empowered to email the others and say, hey, you guys, heads up, this occurred. I think it's of interest to the rest of the planning commission.
I'm gonna delegate that one.
No, I'm saying, if we say that as a suggestion among ourselves, I think when we're talking about things that we're asking of the city council in terms of communications from them, I think it shows responsibility that if we also put an action item for ourselves.
Mark, please.
Robert and Adam, right?
Daniel.
Sorry. Okay, yeah,
Adam's great,
sorry.
though.
I knew it was one of those biblical figures. So. Anyway,
It's Daniel Patrick.
I like what she's saying, but it occurred to me that if we do a group email, it might start a discussion going, and I know we can't do that.
Correct.
So is there a way to do that, to alert that, but is it just say, do not reply, and just,
Send it to staff, and then we send it out to
Okay.
everybody, and we'll
Okay.
say, don't reply, or if you do, you just reply to staff only,
okay.
so, yeah.
So do you understand?
Yeah, I feel somewhat apprehensive just to email the group as a whole, because I'm not raw, I don't know all of the protocols, and so I think we might err on the side of not just emailing everyone.
Send it
So my point is, as our action item for ourselves to enhance communication with the city council, we can say we'll empower ourselves to send, when one of us finds something of interest at the city council meeting, we'll forward it to Robert in the time period right before our meeting, and he'll send it out to the rest of our planning
email.
commission. So I think just saying that as a stated goal makes a difference, because if you do, you might feel intimidated to email everybody.
Email
Well,
what?
the bigger concern is the Open Meetings Act, so that's
Yeah,
why you want to send it to staff, and then.
Okay,
and if-
yeah,
And if we have,
yeah.
and by that way, then we also can make sure that an open meeting doesn't happen. We can share information, you can actually share information too, but to keep it clean, the cleanest
Yes.
thing is to send it to staff, and then staff sends out, and then if you have questions, you just direct it back to staff directly.
So that's
Points of,
my request
And
for
you're
our
always welcome to
action.
do that, by the way. That's something that
Points of-
you don't even have to say as a protocol. You're always, any planning commission member is always welcome to do stuff like that. Yeah.
As long as we just say, this is our stated goal, because we're focused on enhancing communications with the city council. So
points for communication, there we go.
I think if we have 4 good points, I think they're tangible.
Everything that everybody said, I put in here, so when we have
Yeah.
our meeting, I've got a few things to try to chew through and see what their opinion is of our opinions.
Well, they may not get into, they probably aren't going to get into those specifics in that. That's just going to be that's just setting the agenda up. You'll have this actually in the open meeting, you'll have the discussion. But as the chair, you would be representing with your fellow planning commission members there
I
to
guess
talk.
notes. So
Yeah.
depending on time, and if it goes really fast, we can use all of them. If it goes, we might only get to number 2.
Now, hopefully you get through everything, because I know the council wants to figure out better ways to communicate so that there's more back and forth. Randy does bring up a legitimate point, because sometimes it does feel like there's some control things going on, and you don't want, you want to be able to act as you are an advisory body. Always keep that in mind. Ultimately, the council is the one that makes the decisions, but in terms of giving advice, you guys, they don't get to tell you how to give advice. They can put a time frame on when you have to get advice back to them. They can tell you what they think the policy direction is, but you are always free to give the advice on how you believe as a body it should be given to them. So even if they have a policy direction, if you disagree with that policy direction, you can say that to them. It's your prerogative.
So I would beware of any attempt to circumvent that role, and especially as it relates to development regulation. I believe that all development regulations should be reviewed by the Planning Commission. All, not just some, not just what might be communicated to us, but all. It's vitally important. So I just want to, I feel like Eisenhower, beware of the military-industrial complex. I think it's our essential role, and if there's any opportunity to diminish it for one reason or another, we have to be vigilant as a group. So there, I've said it.
Good point.
Any other points? All right.
So the next part here, I want to talk about the open house here first, and so I want to actually first show you some stuff. This is, as we're preparing for the open house next week, we're going to have, besides St. Thomas having their table with questions and stuff, we're going to plan to put some boards. I'm hoping most, if not all of you, can make it, and the idea hopefully being that if we have public coming in, they're there to ask questions. It's there a chance to get feedback more in the one-on-one instead of having to come here and do this formal setup. The idea that they can talk with you one-on-one, and you can have more informal communications and stuff with them. But I want to show you some of the things, the boards and stuff that we're going to present at the open house. So I'll start here. So this is, remember one of the things that's in the provisions there is talking about potentially different distances for the setbacks for the parts of the rooftop playgrounds that are above the 35-foot height limit. So these are what you can see are some of the envelopes at 100 feet. So this whole entire thing would be 100 feet. Then you look at 150, which becomes the orange and the clear, and then at 200 feet you see this little strip, and this is Medina Elementary. So this will be one of the things to kind of give people an idea of what actually that particular setback might actually mean. I'm going to show you all the ones that we've put together so far.
Robert?
Yeah.
Just a second.
Sure.
David Langworth, 648, please.
Thank you.
Okay. This is Bellevue Christian. Again, you can see kind of what the envelope would be for the rooftop play areas. And again, this is a chance for people to kind of comment what they might like, what they don't like, that kind of stuff. St. Thomas. You can see, as we talked about before, this actually kind of theoretically extends out further. As part of the school would be ending up being on the lot that is the golf course. And then the other thing, we'll show some stuff with the table. This is actually highlighting this change with the golf course and going to special use. And then the language you see in here, that's what you'll see on these next ones. I'm not going to go into detail. I just want to show you kind of some of the stuff. This stuff gets a little busy, but I'm not really sure how else we can really, so people can, if they want to, they can actually read it and stuff on this. And this doesn't really show you that it's a different color, the revised stuff, but this in here is all actually in a different color where we've made some of the changes and stuff. And that will actually be on a couple of different ones with some pictures. So we'll also have and another one that has like the public amenities. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the public amenity piece here in a second. And then I'm also going to have them, we've had the notes and stuff about height in case people have questions, and about the administrative special use permit, some of the criteria. You've seen some of this stuff before. And then we'll also have, because this isn't just about the text amendments, this is also about the zoning map, the map changes. So we'll also have, can't make that any smaller, but we'll also have a map there showing the changes and stuff on it too. This is, obviously this is pretty small because of the scale on this, but we'll have a bigger board for people to take a look at. So this will be some of the information. I think we'll probably look to also have some things if people want to fill out documents. I'm really hoping that people are really open to communicating with you all and really giving some good feedback, and I'm hoping we'll have a good turnout. Interestingly, I have had people contact me. I'm trying to think. I think the golf course folks, a lot of people said they got their cards. Well, if you got your card, so I think a lot of people are actually getting them and reading them, which is great, because I think when we used to first send these things out years ago, I think most of them ended up in the trash. So the fact that I think I'm hearing more and more people are at least getting the cards and reading them, I think that's a positive sign that maybe people are paying a little bit more attention on them. So the other thing that I wanted to note here too, real quick for you, was the public amenity piece. You heard St. Thomas talk about it. What I want to talk to you guys about, this is one of the things you guys had a suggestion, and I kind of talk about it here in your current document that's in your packet here, where we're taking a look at maybe looking at this as an incentive zoning approach, which incentive zoning, essentially what the idea of incentive zoning is that you would relax a zoning standard in exchange for a public benefit. And so what I did, and trying to find language on this, by the way, was not as easy as I thought it was going to be. This may still be able to have a little bit more play around with it, but predictability is really important on some of this stuff, and outlining what it is that would qualify and putting some parameters around so there's some predictability to it is really important. And so you see the attempt, but one of the things I wanted to note too is that there is still some questions that the attorney's reviewing about this whole thing surrounding public amenities and how those can be required. And why I mention this is because there's laws out there that talk about what are called extractions. And what extractions are, if you're not familiar with, is when a project creates an impact, like a negative impact. Mark, you're familiar with stuff like this. When it creates a negative impact, a jurisdiction can require the applicant to mitigate for that impact. Now that mitigation is not unlimited. There's actually court cases based on constitutional readings by the courts that place a limit, and it's usually referred to the nexus and proportionality. It's the Nolan-Dolan case. And so when you're usually looking at, you have to actually identify the impact, and there has to be a nexus on whatever it is you're requiring, and it has to be proportional to whatever that impact is. Incentive zoning is kind of a little different than that, so that's why they're taking a look at this, taking a look deeper in this, because incentive zoning really isn't trying to necessarily address an impact. It's just basically you're trying to encourage particular actions. And for example, Seattle uses incentive zoning for affordable housing. So they will relax zoning standards in exchange for developers building affordable housing. So that's the public benefit for them is affordable housing. Us, it's more of these things I kind of outlined you'll see in here. So it actually has a little bit of a different legal take, but they're going to still do a little bit more research. For right now, we'll move forward per your guys' suggestion to have a public incentive in there. And then as we kind of more fully get a chance to dig into this, we'll be able to talk with you a little bit more about the legal ramifications of it. But for now, we want to put it out there at the minimum, at least for now, to get public input on it. So does that kind of make sense, what I'm talking about there?
Yeah.
Legal extortion,
It's voluntary. It's not involuntary.
which makes it legal.
Well, you can also legally do it too without it being voluntary. That's what the Nolan-Dolan stuff gets into. So when you make a negative impact.
Robert, when the public amenity does that relate only to the rooftop playfield? Or kind of walk me through how that would relate to, in particular, St. Thomas?
So from an incentive zoning perspective, what we're doing is that we're giving relief. What we're giving the developer is relief from height standards for a very specific, in this case, it's the rooftop play area, and we identify what consists of that rooftop play area. So that's the relief that the city is willing to grant in exchange for a public benefit that is outlined here. It's still to be determined, but it's outlined, and there's a valuation assigned I kind of came up with in this thing as well. So you're basically exchanging whatever that public benefit might be for giving them additional height. Does that make sense?
It does, but just in a practical way, what would the public benefit be? Would it be a play space area that could be rented? Would it be something unrelated to that?
It's
as
open.
a
I
component
mean,
of the school? Or-
There's a list there, so I listed several different options that can be looked at. It could be and I'm not going to say that this is what's going to necessarily get proposed.
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
saying these are things that can be looked at. So, for example, if you wanted to create a pocket park or an open space with some improvements and stuff related to it, or maybe they're proposed to put improvements into one of the parks or something like that, right? Pay for the improvements into a park, a public benefit to provide those, something that the public can use as a whole. Street improvements, maybe potentially a crosswalk, an improved crosswalk that might go mid-block or something like that. Public meeting spaces. This is one thing I know schools are probably not really open about, but again, it's one of those options. If they were open about it, it's one of the things they could potentially. We're not going to necessarily dictate what they have to do. They come up with a proposal. We then determine whether it's an acceptable public benefit based on the criteria that's outlined in here.
Yes.
So, and they could also, those aren't, you're not restricted to that. If they want to come up with something else, I'll make something up. If they wanted to make what am I thinking of? Some type of like a slide for life thing where, you know, it's a tower that you could slide down or something, like some fun thing. If you wanted to do something, that we're not going to, don't get me wrong, we won't do that. But if they wanted to throw something like that out, okay, we could take a look at that and then see whether that's appropriate for the community, whether it's a
Into
proper
the-
public benefit and stuff.
Medina
Great.
Pond.
So the city tree, for example, under public amenity, city trees could be trees somewhere off-site. So,
Right.
So that could
Right,
be,
maybe it's a contribution to, maybe it's taking the $4 per square foot and then it goes into the Medina Tree Fund and we'll use it for planting in the future. Although one of the things on that you have to pay attention to is that there are state laws about when you get money for things like that, and I don't know if it applies to the public incentive pieces, but I know for mitigation measures, like on road improvements, there's actually laws that says if you have to spend the money within a certain time frame or you lose it, you have to give it back. Those may have same applications on other things too. So there's other dynamics that can come into play, but that would be an example potentially. We could say, sure, give us this much, give us the equivalent in dollars for the tree fund, and then we're going to use that tree fund to improve street trees around the city.
and that's a one-time payment.
Right, right.
Robert, can you talk a little bit about $4 per square foot and how is that measurable?
Yeah, so I mean, basically
In
what...
terms of opening it up to a community meeting or something like that, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you'd have to kind of come up with some value. You'd have to come up with a way to assess the value against like a public meeting space, which one of the things is you could probably take market rates. There's places that will rent you rooms, so you could probably find the market rate for renting rooms and assign a value based on what this is and come up, okay, does that actually equal the amount? If it doesn't, then they may have to do other public benefits in addition until you actually meet that number. So that number doesn't mean it's just one thing. It could be multiple things. It could be multiple things to meet it.
Is that a requirement that there be a value put on, a dollar value on these amenities? Is that, I'm just
Yes.
curious about the rationale for that.
Yeah, and it's to put a parameter so that the applicant knows what
We
we're
can't
going to
have
be
it
looking for.
open-ended. We can't just say you owe us, and then we just keep going back every time we want something.
No, I was just curious about the amount and using it. I mean, just the whole scenario,
Where did the $4 come from, I think is,
Yeah, the
instead of 5.
Yeah, the $4, which is basically was a number thought on about what might be appropriate for, like for example, a sidewalk improvement, appropriately like in mid-block will probably cost about $50,000 to $60,000 because you won't just put stripes across the road. You've got to do all this other improvements and things like that. So this was kind of looking at something like that, maybe as the base model, what something like that might cost. And this value is kind of then, we actually use St. Thomas's number of square footage and kind of set the number based on that. But it can be a different number, it just needs to be something that's reasonable. That's the key thing. So we, like, for example, we wouldn't want to assign $100 a square foot. that would probably not be reasonable, and probably if somebody challenged the ordinance would very easily get invalidated. You got to keep things reasonable within what you're doing with your
But it is
ordinance.
important that you do have a value in there. I guess that's my basic question.
Has to be.
That's part of
I,
it.
I think it is because I kept trying to figure out, I was going through all these other incentive programs at other jurisdictions that have them in place. And ours is not as easy to do because a lot of them simply say like if you get 1 square foot of height, additional height, I'm going to use, this isn't true, but I'm using it as an example. So 1 additional square foot of height, you get 1 additional square foot of height if you provide 1 affordable housing unit. So they make it so it's very, there's, for us to try to do that, it was too complicated. It was going to be way more than it was worth. So this actually just decided to set a valuation as a way to make predictability around, I think, to make it a little bit more supportable. Is that a word, supportable? And so, yeah.
So that it continues in the future, doesn't have to be amended, how about tying it to project value? Because today a project might be, building a house is a couple, like say 2 million, but in 20 years, 20 million will be the normal. And we wouldn't have to write the code because it's based as a percentage of project.
Yeah, that may not necessarily be reasonable though, because say it's a $10 million project versus a 500,000, your amenities on those may not necessarily tie in. We do adjust this $4. If you look on the bottom, it actually adjusts it based on the consumer price index. There is an adjustment to it based on market
In other
rates.
words, writing it so that it's not all of a sudden, so what, it's only 25 cents.
Yeah, so it's not $4, so it's not, in 10 years from now, if this was adopted, in 10 years from now, it wouldn't be $4, it would be $4 plus whatever the progression each year would be added on top of it.
Is this something we could also, at the open house, I kind of have a two-part question. Is this something we could get because I've just, in the community, I've heard people really scared of the height thing, and that's why I kind of introduced this concept, just to make the plan more palatable, so people don't just say, no, I don't want this. If we could get from people at the open house, and I haven't been to one of these open houses, so I don't know how it operates, but like a feedback form with, either we can ask specific questions or just general feedback. We could even make it anonymous if we want people to feel more open about communications. Is that something that's done? And is that something we're planning on doing?
Yes.
Okay.
That's why that's why you see it in here now, and why we're
Okay.
not waiting for the attorneys to be finished with their analysis, because it's a chance to present something to see if there's even an interest by the public to
So-
do it.
These are as informal, these open houses are as informal as it's school. When you go to a school open house,
Okay.
it's that informal.
Yeah, so I went to an open house on a project in San Diego, and they had feedback things, asking for community input
Right.
on specific aspects of, it was for a community center, so at particular aspects, and they kind of guided it, like they gave a few options to kind of seed your ideas, and kind of to choose from there, but I think at this point it might benefit for us to come to a couple different ones that we could find acceptable and propose those in the open house and allow people to give direct feedback to that. And kind of if we seed the direction, like these are some types of.
So you'll be at the open house at your table, and that's what you do, is you just kind of, you
No,
almost.
I'm happy to be there. I'm
No,
just, I'm
that's
trying
what you
to.
do, is you kind of,
Yeah.
you can lead almost your opinion and kind of just answering questions. Because you're right, some people will show up and kind of stall out, but you're getting really specific to the open house. Let it kind
I'm
of,
specifically talking though, I think it's very appropriate for the discussion of the of the public incentive, because my point is, we seem to need internally, like, it's pretty open-ended. It would be nice to hear what people who do have a problem with the height, what they would like to see as a trade-off.
Yeah, see, I'd be cautious because you're not going to determine the trade-off now. You're going to determine you're going to determine the trade-off when they actually come in with a permit. That's
Okay.
when that's all figured out. But again, if you want to put things out as part of your own discussion with them, that's what Sean's talking about.
Okay.
Feel free to do that, but I wouldn't do that as a body, because the actual time that the actual analysis, this just sets the code for it and sets the table for the discussions, and then the permit is actually where you'll do your analysis.
Oh, okay, for some
they
reason,
have nothing set in stone, so maybe they don't need 15, they only need 12. So if we base it on how every foot is so much,
Oh,
and you're
alright.
expecting 15 and they only come in at 12, or
This is-
this many square feet, you may not get enough to do what you're after based on an expectation. So you don't get to actually, you can set up the fee, and it might even adjust how they do their building because of how much it costs.
Okay. So I was under, I guess, the false impression that we were discussing this right now in terms of
No,
putting
we
something
are.
writ-
It's just
you can
how
write
it-
down
how it's-
and move forward with.
No, you're not going to move forward with an actual amenity. You're just looking at the
Yeah.
idea of the
Right.
amenity in
Okay,
general.
okay. We're looking for how we gauge the
Right.
offset.
Yeah, there'd be
Okay.
different ways
So-
to, yes.
Because we're talking about two different things, and we're combining that into one conversation.
Yeah,
right here.
well, because the other part of this is
Forgive
if the
me.
attorneys come back and say that we can't even defend this, then,
Yeah.
then people might be thinking this and then it's complete, and then you're gonna tell them, well, the
Okay.
attorney said we can't even do it.
Okay.
So that's why it's good, it's okay to have those conversations and get people's thoughts and things. But for now, it's the general idea and the general approach, and then let people know that, you know, the actual, if this does continue through and gets adopted, we would actually make the determinations at the time of, when they came in with their special use permit. That's when the actual, work would be done to determine what's the benefit going to be, the public amenity.
I just have a question for you all as to, is this public amenity, this incentive zoning, is this a breakthrough thing for the Medina code, or are there other places in the existing code? You know, like
It's
the-
unique.
It's unique. So in the tree code, for instance, when you take down trees and you replant or you donate to the city or whatever, that's not
Those are-
considered.
No, because those are actually direct mitigation. We're not relieving a standard for it. It's basically, we require you to
Okay.
preserve trees, and then if you don't, this is
Okay.
what you have to meet on
Okay.
it.
So what's unique here is offering relief.
Mhm. And I would also
from the
note,
standard.
that the height standard in here, that's being offered above 35 feet, our code doesn't allow that really anywhere else. So you're truly actually offering something as a relief from our codes, because even in the residential zone where we allow the bonus heights, which is the 36-foot, 30-foot height, if you were on flat land, you'd only get a 30-foot tall building. You only can actually get a 36 on the downslope side of something. So this is unique in that there's nowhere else in the city you can build a building, would be able to build a building over 35 feet in height.
Okay. And does opening that sort of relief and incentive in this instance provide any, I don't know, impetus or requirement, you know, for us to expand that to other
No.
parts of the code?
Yeah,
It's-
you're never required, yeah, you're not, these are all legislative things, so it's all actually policy. And so none of this obligates you to make other changes to your code unless there is a, I'll use the word political movement or policy shift that wants to make those other changes, but you're not obligated to do it at this point in time.
Just wondering
So I
about
thought of one
creating
more thing.
expectations, I guess.
After watching the oldest Sears west of the Mississippi become Amazon, what happens when the life cycle's up? Because this is not the church's property. This is on, so if the church decides to move or something happens, so does the golf course just get to keep the building as, because we're giving this permit to the golf course, we're not giving it to the church, because it's their property.
Right.
And at the end of the day, the golf course is getting this relief for this building or this land that's being leased this way. So if the lease, say they decide to double their rent whenever the term is up on this lease and the church says, no, that's too much, what happens to the building if they ever are not connected? What happens to is this a permit based because it's from the church? Is it a permit that we're just saying you get this no matter what now? What would happen at that?
I think if I'm following you correctly,
Say the church moves away.
what you've brought up before in the conversations, the building doesn't go away, the building is still there.
So the golf course just gets the building back because it's their
Well,
land.
that's whatever the agreements that they have. The city doesn't get into the ownership of buildings, and we're not gonna get into the ownership of
Okay.
buildings. So that's something that they have to decide. What I can tell you is if it's built, it's there until somebody decides to demo it. Yeah. But it can only be used as a school building. and the, over the height thing can only be a playground, a rooftop playground. You couldn't convert that into some other kind of a use on top of that building. Unless our code's changed, and I'm not
Right,
anticipating
that's
what
what,
would
yeah,
happen.
okay. David?
They can only use it for what they've set it to. So if they need a driving range, you know, if they want to, like the lease I saw reverts the property, if there's 3 30-year leases, and the add-ons or token payments of like $1,000 or something.
Okay.
When it reverts, the golf course has an option to keep the building as is, or require them to return it to the existing,
Okay.
the prior conditions. But if they, decide to keep the building and put a driving range up there,
They would have
if
to-
that met the criteria here, they could do that.
They'll be
Otherwise,
here
they
with their
can't.
grandkids saying we want to turn it into a golf course or driving range.
There's just those multi-city, multi-layer golf courses. It'd be kind of fun. But I don't think it fits the criteria that's laid out here.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just thinking about driving range. Quite a picture.
It'd have to be a teaching driving range though, right?
Well, it could be virtual. Who knows what's coming in?
If it's educational, it's a school, then it's okay, right?
Well,
If you're
maybe.
teaching sports, there you go.
Right?
Just asking questions. It's,
I suppose that if you could, people can go on the top of their house if they want to hit golf balls off the top too, right?
Yeah.
No? Don't give anybody ideas.
Comment?
that's where I'm at. Looking for more. Oh, yes, Mark.
So, I'm feeling pretty comfortable the way that this is written right now. I just throw out a couple of things on street improvements. I might add to that, like e.g. Crosswalks, streetlights, maybe, bike amenities. And I'm thinking about like sidewalk amenities. We have a lot of people that walk around the city, and a lot of people walking their dogs. And if, somebody thought, oh, well, I could provide a dog station, like we do have them in the park, but a watering can. I know that they do this at University Place in Tacoma, or near Tacoma, right along the golf course there. Nice big wide walkway and places where you can stop and water your dog and a bench and whatnot. I think those kind of things to me are a public amenity. I think that would be very helpful to
We can
the
put some
people.
examples in there.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's the one thing. And then, even trees, we talk about city trees, and I'm open to putting them anywhere, but I'm trying to figure out if there's a way that we can also suggest in the code that if there is a way to mitigate that additional height by planting the trees in such a way that they mitigate the view of that additional height, would be helpful too, and maybe that's just something that the
That's
staff.
part of your permitting process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, but, that was a couple of things. And then I too kind of questioned how we got to $4 a square foot, but,
It's a good question.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's, I think I'm ready to see what the public has to say about this, the way that it's written right now. I'm really curious as to what kind of feedback we get.
2J, and then I'll be done. The rooftop will have no materially detrimental effects on neighborhood what is a materially detrimental effect?
That's it.
My example is, they built a landfill up in, right by your Woodinville in Clearview. And they told all the neighbors if they weren't unhappy, if it was detrimental to them, that they
Yeah.
would close it. And they had, 2 feet of garbage in their yards because of the seagulls, and they said, well, that wasn't detrimental.
So Daniel, can I put you on the spot, because you probably can, I know what it is, but it's illegal, it's stuff that's used like in legal stuff, and you might be able to explain it a little bit better. Am I putting you on the spot?
You are.
Sorry.
It's his job.
Because it's a term that's actually used when you're looking at mitigation and stuff like that. And I don't know what the legal words they actually put around it, to be honest. Ian, maybe you might be able to
I think I
throw
could
the
look into
actual
that.
legal words around it when you
Could
say
it
material.
be just an impact on homeowner value, since the word material is in there.
Well, that will be something you can it's gotta be something you can measure, something you can, because you're gonna have to be able to, you can't just, it's not an emotion. It has to be something that's measured, property values is measurable.
Right.
Decibels are measurable, those have been brought up. We've mitigated light, they're just not gonna have lights, so that's obviously not a point now, because there's none. But what is, in other words, this gets built and somebody says, you've materially detrimented my neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up because it's definitely a term that is used elsewhere, and so I don't want to just take a stab at it, but it's gonna be something that is measurable and felt. I mean, it's probably the quickest way to say that. Yeah, I'm just trying to think
It's
of.
standard language used in permits for conditions of approval, and I think you're correct. I think it's, in other words, it can't be something that's like an aspirational or an anticipated impact. It's actually got to be something that it can actually be measured and identified specifically.
I'm just anticipating the open house, that's gonna be one of the big
Sure.
deals is, okay, they build it and it destroys Medina. It's not gonna destroy, but, I mean, whatever. What measure does it take to enforce this?
Right.
So is it?
Well, it's
is
the
it a number?
evaluation of noise, it's the evaluation of traffic, it's the evaluation, those are
Okay.
material
Right,
detrimental
evaluation,
impacts.
so we say, I mean, 3 decibel doubling of noise, I mean, in other words, they're gonna ask for what does it mean? You know, cause it's the same question I've got. How much detriment, or what makes a detriment? And it's something that's measured. 10% of property values would be something you could measure. 3 dB, something you can measure.
Well, and so I'm quite frankly not that familiar with your code, having just got onto this right now, but I would guess that you have noise standards, you have light standards, things like that.
Light,
There won't
noise.
be any light
But
on it.
yeah, okay, so you have noise.
Yes.
Oh, is light the one that just went away?
Light was for signs.
Oh, those are signs, okay. So I would imagine that there are some built-in standards that you could find out.
Oh, no, after you get done, I have a comment to add on to what you're saying.
Sure. So I think that there's probably some built-in standards that you could see what materially detrimental is straight from the code, and we can figure out what the remaining ones are.
Because that's gonna be a large question from a lot of people.
Yep.
How about if we throw in 60% of one's view is impacted by that?
You really want to make things that complicated.
I second it.
Historic view.
Historic, or documented view, how's that, documented? We'll go take
Although I
pictures
think
right
actually
now.
you put it in there other than what the funniness of it.
I would love to put it in there, just,
Yeah, I don't know, that might be painful.
While I appreciate it, it's not happening while I'm sitting over here.
oh, really? Oh, come on.
It could be a parting bit of humor, Robert.
It could be, couldn't it? We had a chance to talk to a bunch of real estate agents today and just talking about, Medina is definitely different than the other people on the panel.
Yeah,
So-
Robert knocked it out of the park. He got like 10 laugh lines.
Oh,
Well, yeah, the question was about accessory dwelling units, positive, negative, or no effect, and it's like, well, in Medina, it's no effect, because, 10 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, you can't even see the ADUs here, they kind of sucked into the house, so. Yeah, people kind of got a kick out of that.
And Medina was literally in the middle.
Yes, I
You
was
had
in the middle.
Bellevue and
Bellevue,
Shoreline,
Seattle,
and all these-
Kirkland, Bothell,
but
yeah.
Medina, somewhat, for whatever reason, they put you in the
We
middle.
didn't match up with anything going on in any of the other places, but Randy volunteered me, so I said sure, just to give him a different perspective, and so, yeah, I had a little bit of fun with it. I wasn't even trying to be funny either, but it worked, so I guess.
All right, so we're ready to put this right to the public meeting then.
Yeah, and again, I've mentioned this before, this doesn't obligate you on anything. You can, until you actually take your vote, you can always change your mind on anything on this or modifications and things like that. So like I said, until you make your vote on a recommendation, you're not bound by anything here. So always keep that in mind.
Just last question, I think that we were anticipating some sort of a sound analysis, and what's the status?
Yeah, they gave me, I got the report. Did you send it to me yesterday or the day before?
I sent you the first version of it a week
Yeah, I know I just got it, yesterday.
What's the short version of Screaming Kids?
The first version of the report just analyzed the view or the sound impacts to the west in the Medina Park Place, and they said it's actually a decrease in the amount of sound because of both the height of the building and the parapet wall. It's actually a decrease of, I think it was 4 or 5 decibels. To the second version of the report, which was only possible this week because they had this acoustics company had the first who does it was out on a medical issue for a week, so didn't get to the second part of it. The view to the east of the Clyde Hill neighborhood said that right now that they have very, very little sound because it's blocked by our building. With the rooftop playfield that's only partially blocked by the building, it will go up, it's either 3 or 4 decibels or something like that, to a level that is commensurate with the other side. So both of them will have about, I think, anywhere from 38 to 43 decibels, which is about right around the ambient level. The sound on the Clyde Hill side will actually be largely drowned out by normal traffic noise on 84, however. So basically, we thought it was all very good news. It didn't sound like there's going to be really any impact on the neighbors. I was particularly pleased to see that the impact on Medina Park Place neighbors to the west, because those are the ones that are closest at a visual line, was actually it's quieter on that side.
And we'll still send those reports. I haven't, because I hadn't had a chance to get to, because all this other stuff that's been going on, but we'll send it to our noise consultant and get the city's consultant to review and see if they concur with the results of the report and stuff too. So know that this is just to help. It's not necessarily the full on what happened to the permit, but it's giving an idea, which is what everybody was asking about, what's the difference between the way it is today and how would it potentially change on top, which is a good question when you're looking at code language policy stuff. So it's a really good question to ask. But then the dive-in happens with the permitting stuff, when the particular, maybe this is detailed enough to be particular, I don't know, but that's kind of the separation stuff.
So,
I had one question about the open house, if it is an okay time?
yeah.
Yeah, so,
So we're talking about sending it to, so you get to lead it off.
what's that?
That's where we're going next, so lead it
All
off.
right, yeah, I just wanted to find out, on the land use table, with all the acronyms, is there a legend? And can we make it even easier for people to understand, like color coding or something like that?
Well, I mean, like I said, we highlighted on the thing there, and there is actually in the code, there's a lot more detail and stuff into it. It tells you what an SU stands for
I'm
and
worried
stuff.
about like the level of detail that it might be off-putting. So I'm trying to figure out ways we can make it simpler for people who aren't familiar with those terms.
Yeah, well, the idea here was actually just to let people see, and then if they have questions, ask, because there's only one thing
Okay.
changing in the table. There's only that one thing changing. It's not,
Yeah.
nothing else is changing in the table.
Okay.
So, and the change in there is basically to allow the golf course in the public zoning in addition to the R20 zoning. That's all what the change is on it. So that's all it represents. It doesn't represent anything else beyond that.
Okay, I just worry that because it doesn't actually represent that much, we're just confusing people.
Well, we may, I didn't know how else to actually put it, because we wanted to show people the code changes, because this is what the ordinances are going to look like. It's what
Yeah.
your recommendations are going to look like. So I was trying to make some correlation, excuse me, trying to make some correlation for what we're showing there to what you'll actually then look at documents in your meetings and stuff like that. That's what I was trying to do, but
Okay.
simplify it a little bit.
It's-
But no,
yeah.
I get your point on it.
Yeah.
I was worried that if I just said special use clubhouse, nobody's going to know what that means either, because they're not going to
Yeah.
see the context of the rest of the table or anything.
And so we will have like feedback papers for people? Okay, yeah, I think that's real, I want to encourage people to feel, like I've said this on multiple fora before, people feel scared, especially if they know their emails or their name is going on the public record. So if we have a method of people writing down something on an anonymous little note, we're more likely to get feedback. And I think on a project like this, more feedback is better. That's the end of my questions/comments. Thank you.
Anybody else?
But Nicole, are you saying that it would be wise for us to define these terms?
Yeah, this is
PLASU, for example.
either that or see
Just
that
a simple key at the bottom.
yeah, or color code the square so it corresponds with the color coded map or something.
Yeah, except I don't want people, their eyes going to those other items. I want them to actually only go to the one, because that's the only thing that's relevant, is is what I did actually put the color coding on, which is the special use on that. That's the only thing that's actually relevant on this table. The rest of it's not.
Yeah, but there's a lot of information on there, and for someone to know that that's the only thing that's
Right,
relevant, it
but-
might just end up,
That's why we wanted to highlight this,
Okay.
so that it would bring their
Okay.
eyes to this. That's the idea.
okay.
The other option is to get rid of the rest of it.
So maybe we'll just know that, and we'll
Yeah.
point that out to people
David.
that ask.
So, my suggestion is to just make a pros comment that the only change that's being made is to allow the golf course in the special use thing, and to state that clearly up front or someplace. And then, assuming that we have that, it may be beneficial to get rid of the, huge amount of the existing code, because none of that other stuff that nobody understands is actually up for discussion.
Right.
That's the way it is, and I'm sure,
Mhm.
and I'd also just note that I'm not as worried about shyness issues might be based on prior experience.
How large is 20.21.020? How large is that page with the explanations? Could you just include it so that it's on the table?
No, I think actually going to what David said is probably going to be a better approach. We can actually get rid of these other tables, the residential and public institutions, and just do this one, and we can say special use and say, basically, we're just changing to allow this in there. That's probably going to be the best way to do it.
Okay.
Because like I said, the other stuff's not relevant. It's not really actually relevant for this particular action that's being looked at.
If we have an acronym, let's make sure that we say what it is instead of referring to the Medina Municipal Code 20.
Well, what you're looking in there is actually specifically out of the code. So in your
Yeah.
documents that you're going to take action on, that's another section that it's not part of it, but the other section that has it actually explains what each of those are. So if you actually open up the municipal code, it tells you what an SU is, it tells you what P is, it tells you what all that stuff is. But that's adding another section onto that's not actually going to get incorporated into an ordinance, because an ordinance only looks at sections.
I'm not saying I'm just saying for the open
Yeah.
house, not for the ordinance.
Right, no, and I got that part, and that's what David had said, and that's what we'll put,
Okay.
like, say, special use on there and
Oh,
note
okay,
that.
got it.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
yeah.
didn't catch that part. Thank you.
Okay, one more lap. You got
No.
other questions?
No.
Mark? Jeannie? Randy? I'm good. Dave?
I'm good.
Send it to the open house.
All right.
With amendments as spoken of today.
I'll have, OTEC's been putting these things together, so I'll have her ask her to make some change to this particular board. Because each one of these things I showed you each is a board. So, yeah, okay.
Mr. Chair, may we ask just a housekeeping question?
Sure.
When does the commission anticipate setting the agenda for the public hearing? Is that something you're thinking about taking up after the open house, or we're just trying to sort of understand scheduling?
Yes, and normally I would say we'll talk to our planning director, but we don't know who the planning director is going to be.
Well, we know where it'll be. It'll be in Woodenville.
Okay. Who, not where.
Can you do both jobs?
Yeah.
I don't know.
You've been doing
Bring it
10
up to the city
already.
manager. We've never really set those. I just get asked what order I want a meeting.
No, we actually do ask you guys, so let me put the
Well-
question to you. If we have a regular May meeting, would you want to have the hearing scheduled for that meeting?
Mark's
based
got a-
on what you're
Mark's got a
seeing in here.
question or comment ahead of it, but,
I have an answer and a question.
well, give me the answer.
Yes to that question.
Having a May hearing?
Yeah, but I wanted to find out is if we have enough time for the public notice after the open house to the meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
It's the next day, isn't it?
Then
It's
okay.
15, we have to notice 15 days out.
Okay, then, yeah. As long as I just want to
Puts
make
it in
sure
the
that was,
Can I interject something?
Yes.
We also, if we have a May meeting, it's highly likely we'll have a CMP hearing too. Just
Yeah. Whether I'm here or not, you'll actually have a May meeting regardless, because whether I'm here or not, the CMP does need to go forward.
Yeah.
we can do both.
Yeah.
We've done it before. We can do it.
without
Not
Robert.
not in the summer.
Right.
I think it's really
Not
important.
summer yet.
I think the last time that that question came up, I said it was really important we do the public hearing before summer. So I'm definitely in favor of getting this on the calendar as soon as we can, before summertime.
Yeah, so we can plan it for the May, and then we'll follow up with you if that is a go, and that's going to depend on staff, what happens with staff. But you will have a meeting, because CMP does have to happen regardless.
Laurel?
So I just, on scheduling the hearing, for the hearing, do we need, how final does the code amendment proposal need to be in order to prepare for the hearing? Because we won't have a meeting to discuss amendments to the current draft in between the open house and that May meeting. So do we need to, or do we just go to the public hearing with the current draft and then do
As
amendments?
much as I'm not really happy with all of this, we do have to at some point send it to the public. We can't just amend and amend and amend. At some point, we have to, in all fairness, give it to the public, bring it and vote. And then we can discuss more after we've got public comment and public input.
I just
And
wondered
have that affect our.
To her point, though, we would do this draft. This would be the draft that would be presented at the hearing, and then you can change it if you
Right.
want to at the hearing.
It doesn't stop here. It just, we have other comment.
Right, I just wondered if
It
there
could
was
be
some-
modified at the hearing.
At the
Yeah.
hearing. I just would
And then we
not
could
want
take action at that
Yes.
time.
to have a public hearing
And
based
then
on
not use it.
something that, right, and not use, and same thing with the open house. I wouldn't want to have an open house, get some significant feedback that no one sees in the public notice about the public hearing, no one sees incorporated the
So
open
what we're
house
saying is,
feedback.
this is our best attempt right now. Do the open house, get their comments on where we're at, and then come back and maybe finish it or continue discussion.
Okay, just so the public's clear on why they're not seeing their feedback incorporated into the draft that we consider at the public hearing.
Although we can, if we can get summaries of it and stuff, so that would be one of the things potentially, if we can get summaries of it, you could include that into the packet that comes out with this, which would be ideal. Problem is, I won't be here to do it, but that would be ideal if it could
We've done that
happen.
in the past.
What's that?
We've done that in the past.
Yeah.
We've summarized the public hearing
The
to
open
help
house.
with our deliberations at the, we've summarized the open house to help with our deliberations at the public hearing.
Great.
That's what I was just
Sorry,
going to ask is, the ability to summarize as Randy so eloquently stated, I just want to make sure that that is a separate part, that we've learned this from the public hearing, boom, da-da-da, and this is ours, this is what we've heard, and please comment on that at the public hearing.
Yeah, and what I would suggest, after the open house, if you have feedback that was given to you specifically, put an email together and send it to
Take
me
notes.
so that whether it's me or whoever can assemble all of that. We'll have whatever people do in writing there, but also, if you can, take a little bit afterwards and send that in an email, and then we can make sure that all gets incorporated into and make it pretty easy for whoever comes up.
The tree open house that we did, I just had a piece of paper and just on the left was against, on the right was for, and then just 0 through 9. And I said, we don't need your names, we don't want, other than just put a mark, how much you are for or how much you are against. And then each mark also represented one person. So the number of marks and then figuring out how, the number, whether they were truly for or truly against, gave us an indication also of whether we were in the right direction or whether they're truly for or truly against what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
And that alleviated a lot of people, because I said, I don't even want your name. But, just put a mark on it.
That's helpful.
But that was just me doing it. You can do whatever way you want. We each, if we show up, we get to do, we're just there. I just took a little table and just people talked and
Okay.
answered questions to the best of my perspective. And then other people talked about their perspective and we ended up getting some pretty good input.
Okay.
Everybody's good? Okay, open house time.
All right. A week from today, next Wednesday, 4:30 to 7:30. So let's just walk in. So encourage your neighbors, whoever you know and stuff, they could stop in sometime. And if they're not able to, they can also send email comments in too for it. They don't have to necessarily be there too.
And then what email address do you want them to send it to?
I'm here until the 11th, of May, so they can send them in to me.
What was the time we get, 4:30 to 7:30, did you say?
On the
Next Wednesday.
25th?
Next Wednesday, that's the 25th.
If we're available to come, do we have to be here the whole time? Because I've got,
You come and go as you please.
Okay.
And you'll get helped in and helped out?
No,
Wait, what?
I just might have a conflict, that's all.
I just had a question about emails. And I thought it might be useful to have a PC mail with the planning commissioners on it as an alias, like CC, like we have for CC mail.
That's a suggestion that could be, I can ask about it. I can ask about it.
I don't know if people think it'll be useful or.
Yeah, usually people don't email the planning commission very often. It's usually council that they contact because they're the ones with the power. But I can ask about it. I can see what they'll do.
True. It's better that way.
Yeah, I was wondering that.
If you haven't noticed, I actually, because I assemble your guys' names every time, both the Medina and the ones that you want me to send stuff to. I end up, so I don't have I could group them, I haven't, but because there's always turnover happening, but, yeah.
Okay, discussion on construction mitigation plan policy guidance and amendments.
All right, so this is actually, I'm trying to think, who was here about a year ago? And we had this conversation before. Who was all here?
Mark?
Was it just
The four
was
of
it just
us.
the four of you?
Yeah.
Okay, and so we have 3 new ones on it. Okay.
Remember that it's-
You were here, you don't have to remember, but you were here.
Thank you.
All right.
You were, you had very intelligent comments.
Of
So,
course.
yeah, so this is one of your, work program items. And actually, before we go into this, I want to first comment on, because I've heard from a couple of you about what was on the city council's agenda there, where they were talking about quasi-judicial. And as I mentioned to you guys previously, that was really honestly one council member, that was the mayor, that brought that up to the rest of them. And if you listen to the recording, because I don't think anybody, did you show up late, Mark? You showed up at the end of it, didn't you?
The last meeting?
Yeah, Monday?
Yeah.
I
So-
spoke publicly on
Right.
there at
So
the
you-
end of the
you, please,
meeting.
please chip in on it. I mean, basically, when she brought it up, there really was, the rest of them kind of just like, okay, whatever. There really wasn't any discussion about it. The only thing is, I think Jen made her comment about whether, because Cindy brought up about whether it was, that this was WCA. And I think Jen asked Cindy, was that as WCIA advising the mayor, or was that WCIA advising the rest of the council? Because that's a kind of a thing that's going on right now in their internal politics about individuals acting on behalf of the rest of the group. There's actually some issues about that surrounding their internal politics. So anyway, the council has not given any directions whatsoever on this quasi-judicial question. So part of the discussion, we had this a year ago, but now we've got 3 new members, so we're going to want to go through this again. There's a memo I put together a while back where there were some key policy questions, including the quasi-judicial, for us to walk through here, get your feedback. This feedback then will be shared with the council, part of the communications. Council will have a chance to take a look through it and stuff, and get some policy guidance possibly from them that will then be brought back to the planning commission as you then move forward with, I threw a draft here together because a lot of people find it easier to focus when something's actually been written. Originally, we did this without a draft. We did it actually just directly off that policy document. But like I said, I think every time we try to do that, it just seems like we struggle. So I wrote something up on it to help focus people's discussions. But everything is subject to change in it based on what comes out of the policy discussion. So with that, I want to go ahead and go to the memo on policy discussion. So before I start on that, is there anything you want to ask or any questions or anything before we start going through the memo?
Mark? Anybody got? Nope, you still got the floor.
Okay. So we're just going to the memo right now. Not going to get into the other text spot stuff. So starting out with, it's been a while since I've looked at this. So the first thing we got into was on, I think it's page 2. I asked the policy question, right now currently, the current code requires construction mitigation plans to be submitted with a building permit or a grading and drainage permit. And then I have the ability to waive it on certain occasions about it being submitted, not the construction mitigation plan, but whether it has to come in with a building permit. I actually refuse to do it. People have asked before and I won't do it. But the question here for you, from a policy perspective, is whether we want to continue this trend where we only require construction mitigation plan when it's a building permit or a grading and drainage, or would you want to expand that? I guess actually, because that would be the option.
What other permits would you extend it to?
You could look at it to be required for everything from mechanical permits to any land use permits. Actually, the land use is a little bit more difficult, but you could require it to come in with the land use permits if you didn't want to do it with the building permits. You could expand it to be pretty much any way you want.
Mitigating, maybe like rock walls, is that more land use or is that,
Well,
that's landscaping?
Rock walls have building permits associated with them. I mean, it needs to be associated with a permit.
That's what I'm trying to think of what other, because you could put up just a wall and
Well, a rock wall would be a building permit.
that's already covered.
Yeah, it's a building permit already covered, but
What's an example that's not covered?
mechanical permit, standalone mechanical permit, or a standalone plumbing permit.
Start with Mark, you were at your hand up higher.
Sorry, Dave. I was thinking, what about a landscape permit where somebody wants to take down a lot of trees?
So again, that would be something, if you wanted to look, we could. Currently not required on any tree permits.
Right,
But-
but if somebody, and there's a couple of lots that if somebody wanted to take down a lot of trees and they want to log them and take them out of the city on big logging trucks.
That's where I was going with it, was something like, because what we seem to mitigate and what we're construction or reconstruction or landscape mitigation is what I think we're kind of saying.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to just taking a bunch of trees, you just take out a whole lot of yard. You got 100 yards of whatever you put in a pool.
Well, then that's a grading and drainage permit, or a pool has a building permit.
Okay, so is it just mechanical then?
Well, no, again, because a tree permit doesn't require it, and also land use permits don't require it. Land use tend to be more conceptual, and they often are earlier, can be earlier in the process.
What would we need to mitigate that? I mean, you've already got your tree code. I mean, the trucks coming and going, since there's no code about trucks, we just kind of give rules about, or guidelines about school zones and times.
Well, again, I mean, a tree permit would not require construction mitigation unless it's associated with a construction project, which then has a building permit. And that's typically where the large scale, what you're talking about, usually happens.
Yeah.
I haven't had a permit come in that I can recall where it was just a large amount of trees and nothing else.
Okay, just so I can stay with my question here, but correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Bill Gates buy a bunch of property and just turned it into a park? And I don't know if there were any trees taken out, but to me, that's an example of where somebody could create a park and wants to take out a lot of trees and they want to do some logging, get those out of there so they can create this nice long lawn.
He triggered
park.
building permits with that work.
It would?
He did.
Okay, you're talking about Gates did, okay.
Yeah.
As long as it's covered with a building permit, but I can see where a project could be so disruptive if you're altering landscape, like you suggested, moving a lot of dirt around, removing trees, whatnot, without a building that, I wouldn't want those to necessarily skate through. If we have a bunch of trucks taking soil out to get dumped so that
The
somebody.
grading and drainage permit also triggers the
Oh, that's
CMP.
right, grading and drainage.
But doesn't that have to do, you've been patient, Dave.
What if you just, I have two questions. Can you think of an example, and I'm just gonna ask both of Brian and Rob. Can you think of an example where a mechanical permit is required a construction, a mitigation? And then the other one is, if you just demoed a house, does that require you just go and scrape it?
The demolition permit.
The demo is a building permit, so yes, a demo permit does require a construction mitigation plan.
Okay.
And on the other one, the mechanical, usually it's people putting in water heaters or air conditioning or something like that. Yeah, it's nothing more than usually the van. It's usually a van, and it's the workers there that is really all that happens with that kind of activity.
So the only thing is if you needed a crane to put a air conditioner on your roof.
Yeah, and I don't know if I don't know if they bring a crane in or not. That's a good question. But yeah, I mean, that could happen, I suppose, yeah.
Okay.
So I had
Yes.
kind of a follow-on to Mark's question. Since we're losing Robert and all of that years of knowledge, is there anything that you can think of that people have complained of, or like people in the community have called in with frustration about something on something that wasn't covered by a construction mitigation plan?
No, I mean, pretty much the stuff that comes in, the main thing I get actually, and it's from the applicants, and that is that they want me to waive the requirement for construction mitigations, often when they're phasing projects and they won't do it. So what you often actually see is more the other way around, where they don't want us to, they want to waive the requirement or turn it in later. So, for example, the demo you use, we get this all the time. They want to come in and do the demo work, and then come in later on with their building permit, and we won't let them do the demo until the construction mitigation plan is done, but they don't want to do the construction mitigation plan until the building permit comes in. So, so I don't actually get it from residents the way you were talking. I get it the other way around, where
Okay.
they want us to be more flexible with when we would require the construction mitigation plan. And like I said,
Okay.
I've not been willing to go there because I don't think the community really supports that, and I don't think it. We're trying to require people to mitigate for their impacts, and if you let them do construction without that, then you're not really requiring them to mitigate.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
One more, I get, one more just trying to answer the landscaping one, because usually you're importing or exporting dirt off the property is where we do this. So if you didn't take any dirt away from the property, you're just moving it around. So maybe you were on a hillside and you just scraped and pushed. Is there an amount of dirt where you have to?
25 cubic yards.
So it's already, okay, so it's already done, that's.
Yeah, that's
what
our
I've
threshold
got.
for the grading and
Heck,
drainage.
I've almost needed that for beauty bar.
Or 2,000 square feet of surface area being disturbed. That's the other one. Yeah.
They probably have.
I don't think I asked that. Check.
I had a question, but I forgot what it was right now, so come back to me.
It doesn't sound like there's any particular reason to expand
CMPs.
the types of permits then that, that should come under this requirement.
Is there, to the structure themselves, I mean, let's think of roofing, something that's outside, something that you could actually mitigate. No, then it's all construction.
No.
So then, is there a reason to contract it?
Great.
That's part of the question.
Mark?
I'm sorry.
I just remembered. Okay, I've had occasions where we want to demo a project and want to get it cleaned up for various reasons. Some of them really good for the community, some of them maybe not so good. But is there any way that we could see it, that we might, if somebody wants to demo a building and get the site prepared, we either have to preload it because we've got bad soil, we got to get the soil out of there, we've got to get new soil in, that we could issue, have them do a separate CMP just for that demo and land work, and then a new CMP for the building permit. Is there any way that we could do that?
Well, you can do anything you want, but this is the downside of that is, at least my experience is that then people get confused. Because you'll have this, and then they'll say, well, then this doesn't count towards the other one. And so then they might try to separate things, what might be a level 2 all of a sudden becomes a level 1 because they separate things out. And then when you're doing multiple construction mitigation plans on a property, even particularly when they're phasing it like you're talking about, I've had people get really confused about the phase, when phasing happens, and so we don't.
When you say people, is it the?
Residents.
Okay.
Nearby folks that see the noticing things on them. So, or what'll happen is the work will be a code of conduct, right, that starts out with, so there's no noticing. And then people are going, well, do they have permission to be out there even though they know a new house is going to be built? And yet they're out there, they've demoed the place because, and it was done under a code of conduct, because it qualified as a code of conduct. And then knowing later on there's a construction mitigation plan, and so then that confuses folks too. And often demo is actually your biggest impact area. It's not really, construction itself isn't actually where the biggest impact happens. It's usually when demolition work is taking place. That's when you have the trucks in and out, or the grading, the grading on the property. That's when all the major impacts are usually happening. And then at the end of the project, when everybody's rushing to finish it, because then you have hundreds of contractors showing up at the same time.
Okay, that raises another
Still going.
question. So, just listening to you right now, I don't have a problem with what you said, but it just gives me an idea. What if we just said, if you want to do demo, it's a level 2, no matter what? Forget the construction code of conduct, because like you said, there's more potential impact from demolition. Why don't we just make that a level 2?
Well, because you're setting a threshold on the impact. So for example, if you were just going to demo a garden shed, let's say, normally that wouldn't require a permit, but you usually see it doesn't require a demo for something that small. Usually the demo is only required for a single family house. So you're going to say if somebody does a single family house that's normally a level 1, they're now going to have to do a level 2 because of the demo?
Oh, okay, sorry. I get type 2 and level 1 mixed up. So it's, okay. Change what I said as level 2 to level 1, which is the next one after construction code of conduct, so that we catch the demolition and that larger potential impact. If somebody wants to do that, we just don't let them skate free because if they're below the cost or whatever other criteria that we have. Does that make any sense at all?
So
I'm just trying to see if we can create
I
something.
don't think because of the public noticing and things, I don't think you're creating anything for the property owner unless they're not planning to do something for a couple of years. But then we would have you just do a demo permit and you do your level 1 CMP if that's what was triggered with it, and they would then secure the site.
Okay, now I'm just going to throw out another possibility here. So we either have an earthquake where we have a major windstorm and we have trees that fall and ruin a house, or earthquake destroys a house. The owner is now without a home. They either have to move someplace. They haven't even hired an architect to even begin plans, but we want to get rid of that house as fast as we can. How can we allow them to take care of that, to clear out the site and make it good so that they can start a construction process? But to start a construction process, you get plans and everything it's going to take a year.
Well, I'm going to tell you from experience, right? From experience, they never want to stop with just whatever the damage was. Whenever there's damage, there's always more things going on with it.
2240 78th. They tore the house down 4 years ago. It's just a lot
Oh,
still.
just down the street from you?
Yeah, they tore a house down 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's still, exactly what you're saying. They got a demo permit, they tore the house down, and it just sits there was an accessory building in a house, and it was at least 5 years ago, and the lot's just sitting there still.
Yeah, and you can do that
Yeah.
because they triggered a code of conduct with it.
Yeah, but, okay, well, here's what I'm saying, is that part of the mitigation is, as I remember, they also left the hole there, and we had kids
Oh,
potentially.
that was the other direction. Yeah, that was the.
That was the
that
the abandoned
Yeah, we called
project
that
site.
Okay, so, but.
duck pond.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, we don't want to leave a site dangerous, and that's the idea of the construction mitigation plan, level 1, is that we can say, hey, okay, yeah, you can go ahead, get rid of that house that
Actually,
was
it's not the
destroyed
CMP,
and make
so-
this, huh?
It's not the CMP. We address the security of the site and the condition of the site through the demo and grading and drainage permits that usually get triggered with those things, not through the CMP.
The duck pond house it doesn't quite qualify because it was actually there was construction. They'd actually gone through, demoed, and were in construction when they abandoned the project.
Right.
The one going to the south, it's all flat and everything like you're saying. It's completely safe property if you were to trespass.
Yeah. So you were able to give them a demo permit without a building permit in that case?
A demo permit is a building permit.
You earlier said that you wouldn't allow somebody to do a demolition without a building permit that had another project attached to it.
Right, so a little bit misspoke there. We generally don't. We only, when somebody wants to do a demo independent of everything else, what we require is bonding, security, all this other stuff. There's a whole bunch of things that we put in place and require, and we have allowed people in more recent times. What we don't let people do is then demo and then turn around and have a building permit in, because that was really more what your question was about. They do a demo, they're phasing the work, versus they're tearing the house down. It's going to be a couple of years before they're coming in with something else. But where they want to come in, they want to tear the house down, and then while the house is being torn down, they want to get their building permit in the process and that's what we won't let people do. But if you're just doing a demo and you're going to vacate the property, it's just going to be empty, yeah, we'll let people do that with the security and stuff, but we won't let them do it as a phasing with one right after the other one.
So, okay.
Yeah,
I know, for some reason, I just got a little energy in this. So I've got the project that you guys approved for CMP, and it was sold. They had a tree fall into it. They had to do some remedial work. It's been sitting there for 2 or 3 years vacant. Do you remember?
I'm familiar.
And to me, it's an eyesore. And to me, it would have been better to be able, they've been trying to get this thing built, and it's just the whole time to get through all the process has taken us probably a couple of years at least before we got it submitted. But it would have been great to be able to, tear that down, make it look into a nice park-like setting rather than a house that's collecting rats and homeless people.
Well, this is the answer I have to you on that, because I remember all that stuff. We actually, what we told them to do, you're talking about tearing the house down. They didn't need to tear the house down. They could have done repair work. What we did for them is that they could have actually, and originally they came in and then they changed their plans, what I was saying about earlier. They came in and we basically issued a permit to let them do the repair work to get the place so it was occupiable. We weren't going to let them scrape it because that wasn't necessary to bring the house up to being safe again. That's a different project. That's wanting to do something much more expansive. What we did for them was, because you're right, the tree fell, we got permits and we told them, you will get the permit so you can make the house secure and safe, and then if you want to come in and do the rest of the stuff later, you can progress for it. They chose to go a different route with it. That was their decision, but we weren't going to give them immediate permits to scrape the house because that wasn't necessary. They needed to go through the regular permitting process because we look at public safety on it. It wasn't a safety issue if they would have simply taken care of the things that they had said that they needed to do initially, and we would have given them the permits right away for that.
But, okay, what you didn't include in that is that happened with the previous owner to the one that actually submitted for the permit. And so that house sat there for 2 or 3 years empty, and I'm just saying, is that what we want in our city when those things happen?
It's up to the applicants and the property owners to make those decisions.
But I think we need to be flexible as a city to say, hey, this house, the new owner didn't want that house, the previous owner didn't want that house, they all wanted it torn down, but nobody was ready to come in with a building permit yet. They talked about it, but...
Yes, you can do it. You can buy your neighbor's house that's in front of yours. You were one off the lake. You can buy the neighbor's house and tear it down. You don't have to build a new house there. But that's the end of the process.
He just said he wouldn't let them do that.
What I said is that you would have to go through the process to tear it down.
And that's what I'm saying. Okay, then maybe I misunderstood you. I thought you said you wouldn't allow that process to happen if somebody just wanted to tear down a house.
No, what I said before is that if you're trying to phase it, so you tear the house down and then you're while that's going on, then coming in with your building permit.
But what if it takes a year or two to even get to that point?
Well, then they're not, then they're not concurrent. He just doesn't want the...
It's two different things. Nicole.
So what I'm hearing is there's actually confusion in the community about all these different level 1, 2, type 1, 2, 3. And then we're discussing the possibility of incorporating a certain type of phased plan. It's like, what does the community want? Well, we get to talk about that right now. That's the beautiful thing of this process. So if we want to make a phase thing, we can change what those current levels are. We can make it less confusing. We can make it so that people in the community aren't confused by type 1 and decision level 2. You know what I mean? And if we're adding phases and what's the threshold for those phases, we can also add an emergency one specifically for tree falls and earthquakes or That's up to us. If this is something that's an actual need in the community, this is our chance to talk about it and make that happen.
David?
So with regard to the scenario, I didn't understand how the code was stopping them from doing a tear down and then a construction.
The idea, okay, you correct me if I'm wrong. You can tear down a house. You can, you have to show title, obviously, and go through the process, but you do a construction plan, which is a demolition. That's your construction plan. We're calling it construction, even though in the end you're demolishing the house. You get all the permits, the bond, the insurance, everything that's associated with it for the city, and you can tear it down. What he's saying is you can't get a demolition permit, and while it's being, you're not going to get a construction permit. Phasing is what they're calling it. I mean, if you're going to build a new house, you have to get all the permits together. What's the time frame?
So let me give you one qualification on that. So because the construction mitigation plan, the key is that the construction mitigation plan has to cover everything. So let's use your scenario you just talked about. You could have came in with a demo permit and got the construction mitigation plan for the entire project with that. They could have done that. And the building permit could have then been going, because people do that. And then in the course of that, then they're applying for their building permit. And whatever time it takes. But the CMP still covers everything. And that's the key thing we're talking about here. What we don't want to see happen, because that's just what confuses people, is when you start letting work happen, demolition work starts happening without people being aware of what's actually being planned for this whole
Try
thing.
this one. How about it's not a phase mitigation plan?
No, it can be a phase mitigation plan.
That's what I'm saying. The construction mitigation plan is A to Z, whereas your phases, I think you just end up getting multiple
Right,
construction
what our
mitigation
big
plans.
requirement, and what you're getting into is that they didn't want to do the full construction mitigation plan until later. And what I'm saying is that you actually have to, and we tell people this, they have to do the full construction mitigation plan up front, and then you can phase your permits however you want within the context of that construction mitigation plan.
Okay, but real life example, if you do that, if you submit a construction mitigation plan to demo a house that you haven't even started to design yet, you don't have any information about how much dirt you're taking out of the lot, how can you provide all that information if you haven't even started the design process?
So, and again, I'm going to go to this where you're having things going over each other. So if you're talking about something where, again, the demo happens, and then they're going to secure the site, and they're going to do all the things we require, and then they're going to come in for a building permit a year later, that's really what you're talking about. We let people do stuff like that, where they secure the site, they come in a year later. What we don't let people do, because this is what people come in wanting to do, is that they'll want to do the demo and at the same time be submitting their building permit in for review while the demo is going on. And that's the stuff we won't let happen because they actually are overlapping with each other.
Yeah.
So,
Well, okay. To your point, it's very confusing. People don't understand that.
well, and here's the problem, is you're going to have this problem no matter what you do because contractors, as you know, come with all kinds of ideas on how they want to approach demo, construction and stuff. What we do and what we require to try to keep it as simple as we can is that we make them identify construction impacts regardless of what work they're doing. We want to know the whole entire project, and we make them identify that up front so residents can make informed comments on the CMP versus they do this today, they do this a year from now, which is what actually does confuse people a lot. So by making the contractor, the applicant, the developer identify and go through an exercise to identify everything, it actually helps residents comment better on a project versus here's one little piece today, here's another little piece tomorrow. Because that's the one where they have the most difficulty with.
I think there is room though for, it's complicated, but we can simplify even just the naming scheme of things. And I made a public comment at one of the city council meetings as well. We should have in plain English with diagrams, the process and what people's residents and what their rights are, or the contractors' responsibilities are, and really describe what does a level 2 tailored construction mitigation plan mean, and what does that mean you can do as a neighbor, and
Well, you won't be putting that in a code.
no, I'm saying, but we can make that process simpler because right now the naming scheme is pretty
Are you
confusing.
suggesting just changing the nomenclature? So, because it can be,
That and some other things too,
like type 2 level 1, for
We-
example.
that's a good first step. It's a simpler thing. If we want to also consider phased or emergency kinds of plans, they could get their own number, but right now there's very similar sounding names, and it is confusing. So I know this isn't part of the actual the code, but it should be communicated on the website in a very clear way. And we can, in the code, we can make it easier by streamlining these names a little bit.
Sort of, Robert kind of touched on this, but is that normative text, or these are like words that I use, normative text or non-normative text? If we're saying this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, that's the purpose of the code.
No,
Just
yeah, sorry.
But, having two descriptions of, what something is, that in and of itself will confuse people because you use some informal language which gives somebody an intuitive understanding, which is different than we're laying out the formal language, and that causes some
No,
formal set of
I get what you're
problems.
saying, but I've also looked up the other, like Mercer, I forget which city, Mercer Island has like a summary, overview on their website. It's also a federal movement is to make things more accessible and direct. So this is consistent with a federal movement to make confusing code at any level of government easier. And yes, while there's some parallelism, you can always hyperlink from the plain English or normative text.
Right.
You can, I think the actual federal term for it is the plain, maybe somebody knows the name of this federal initiative, but it's to make forms take less time. It's to make government operations more transparent and accessible to the public. And so if it's good enough for the federal government, I think it's probably good enough for the
But there's
city
two
of
different
Medina.
things going on here, and that's the one thing I want to make sure it's clear. What you're talking about, what you've got in front of you is about code. Right, we're talking about
Yeah,
code.
I-
And what you're talking about is not what you do with code. What you're talking about there is what you do with your administrative processes, which that's a separate discussion, which, again, whoever's in the seat, we've always been happy to have those discussions if we have the resources, because that requires resources. So if the resources are there, we can do, we can do things administratively. Don't ever there's never going to be disagreement on that. But that's a separate discussion from what you're looking at when you're talking about code. And so you want to separate those things out in your discussion, because otherwise you really are going to confuse people in the conversations here, including the public, because they're going to think, oh, we're going to be putting requirement to put up on our website saying that this is all going to be up there. Well, that's not a code requirement. That's an administrative thing that you
And
do.
I recognize that this is a discussion of code right now, but the first step we can do to make the code simpler is with that in mind of simplification and communication to the public, we can change the names of things as represented in the code. And I think that's an important first step.
It's the Federal Plain Language Guidelines,
Yes,
2011.
yes, thank you.
Well, one of the things that I was going to comment on is the next policy question, which she's already introduced. I found that I had to sit down and write, this is 1, this is A, this is 2, this is 1 and 2. Is there some reason it can't be all phase 1, 2, 3 or whatever, or level 1, 2, 3? I mean, why split it up? I think it's I read this, it took me a while. I had to sit down and put it down on paper to figure this out because, and I thought, why is it so complicated? Can't you just have simple?
Yeah, and so when they put this together, this is just following what they put together. They actually created 2 types of construction mitigation plans. This is going to make things sound more confusing, but this is what they did. They created the code of conduct,
Yeah.
and then they created a tailored construction mitigation plan. And then what they did is the tailored construction mitigation plan just has 2 processes, but technically a tailored construction mitigation plan, whether it's level 1 or level 2, is exactly the same thing. The only difference is process. So that's why they set it up the way they did. You can go though, because they're based on type 1, type 2, type 3 decisions. So if you want to change the name to something different, like construction mitigation plan level 1, level 2, level 3, that's all doable. But what they did originally was they set it up that way. And just keep in mind the tailored construction mitigation plans 1 and 2 are actually the same thing. The only difference is process, and that's why they gave the different nomenclatures to them.
Well, I understand, and this is not substance, this is not policy, this is just simplification.
Yeah.
And I really think that, I agree with, she brought it up, and I had a big star on that,
Yeah.
because I thought why the confusion?
This has come up before about
Has it,
just the language,
Mhm.
whether it could be simplified. Obviously, it could be.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, again, if you wanted to call it construction mitigation plan level 1, level 2,
Yeah.
level 3, and that would correspond with the decision type. Because a code of conduct is a level 1 decision type, a level 1 tailored construction mitigation plan is a type 2 decision, and a level 2 tailored construction mitigation plan is a type 3 decision. Yes, I can rattle that off my tongue.
Good. Well done. I always try to find three things, and am I speaking out of turn?
no, no.
So the first one was the nomenclature piece, just simplifying that so it's clearer to understand which level or
Yeah, so I mean, we could eliminate
which type.
the tailored and just call it construction mitigation plan level 1, level 2, level 3, or if there's a different way you wanted to
Just
say it.
so it's helpful because it always was confusing about, a type is also a level, but they never corresponded. So that was
Right.
always confusing to me. I recall, so that's number one. Number two was we had an incident with Overbrook many years ago. And I think it was a flashpoint for some people, I think for Alex in particular, where there seemed to be the mitigation process seemed to result in unreasonable delay for, I think he was adding onto a deck in a single-family home. You may remember the facts better.
I'm not aware of anything on that.
But because of a letter that someone
Oh,
sent that
Yeah,
wasn't even
I know what you're talking about.
wasn't even connected with the project. I think it added a 60-day. He had to wait 60 days just to add on to a deck or repair a deck.
What happened on that, now I know what you're talking about. What happened on that is he had an approved construction mitigation plan, and near the end of his project, he decided to make a major modification to his project, which was not accounted for in his original plan. So we required him to go through a revision of his construction mitigation plan. And what happened was, our code says that if there is it's one that requires public noticing when you do a revision. If nobody comments on it, then we can approve the revision and you're done. Somebody objected to the change, and that change resulted in him into a level 2 tailored construction mitigation plan. That's one of the things actually we talked about, and I think it is one of the questions in here.
Yeah.
And actually, you'll see in this draft, one of the things we needed to do was better define stuff like that, because part of the problem with the current code
Yeah.
is that it's not really very well defined on what constitutes a major, minor change when you need to actually go back in and have a revision done.
So one thing that would be a very important modification would be dealing with that scenario.
Right, absolutely.
And another similar to it. And I think that's dealt with in some of the staff comments. And then lastly, just the threshold where these different levels are triggered, looking at the staff proposed changes in thresholds, that looked very sensible. Maybe there's more discussion relating to that in the group, but so adjusting these thresholds to a higher,
Do you want to see which page you're looking at for those?
well, an example
So I help
is,
everybody out.
Yeah,
There's no
and
paper on it.
an example is
It's draft.
maybe
Charts,
third
charts that
page.
list the old and the new.
The
but
current
it's
and the
very
proposed.
concise. Whether
Proposed.
all of the wording is perfect, but the concept is excellent, I
So-
think, of having that chart.
So maybe changing the threshold to a higher, there's a higher threshold would mean fewer CMPs ultimately.
Well, right.
Because go please.
Well, I was going to say, and the thing you said, though, that's actually going to be in the revision section, but the other part here, that's the threshold that tells you when
Yeah.
you trigger certain
Yeah.
things.
So those, and then I liked what Nicole had said about and this is just a fourth item, that talking about this emergency provision and where that might fit into this, relating to maybe some of Mark's kind of black swan events, and how, and if that,
Really happened.
and Robert, if that even relates to what we're talking about.
Well, as I mentioned to you before, I mean, because here's the thing, when you're thinking about emergency generally means that you just restore something to what's necessary, so it's occupiable or something, and that's not where usually they stop. What usually happens, because I had this happen over and over again here, They use the emergency then to make other changes that they've always been interested in, but they still want it done under the emergency, and we won't let them do that. We let them do what actually is pertinent to the emergency, not the rest of the things that they just want to do. And that happens, I've had that happen multiple times with various projects. When it's an emergency, we don't stop people. We'll say, take care of it, come and get your permits afterwards, and then if that's what needs to be done, because if it's an emergency, it's because there's a serious issue going on, or...
Call it safety instead of emergency, a safety situation?
Well, emergency usually indicates safety. Their situation wasn't necessarily emergency, but to Mark's point, they couldn't occupy the house because it was opened up. You know, they had water leaking and they needed to get a tarp on it, and I don't think most people want to necessarily live in their house when there's like a crack open in it. But we were not going to put them through the hole, but then they wanted, like I said, they wanted to scrape the house. That's a different issue versus getting your house back to being occupiable versus building something new.
I think we're getting off on one particular, out of the 1,000 residences, how many times has this happened? I mean, we've had several trees fall down, but someone who didn't want to immediately fix it, someone who got fortunate that a tree falls on a house they wanted to tear down anyway. We look at the exactness of the scenario.
Right, but what I'm getting to is people will use the emergency to try to do way more than that's actually necessary. And again, if you want to create the code so they can do that, but what I have found is that residents have been questioning why can they like tear a whole house down for something that could have been done a lot simpler and quicker and easier. So that's the thing you run into. But you can set your standards however you want to. If you want to say if there's an emergency, they can scrape the house and build a new one and skip the rest of the process, you can do that, and I suspect people will try to claim emergencies more often.
Start knocking trees on their own house on purpose.
I don't know if anybody will do that, but I think you'll have more people trying to claim and argue with us about emergencies.
That's what you get paid for.
Well,
Yeah.
To that though, I mean, I can see a situation where if something happens, a tree falls in a house is not livable, and they decide, this house is a piece of crap anyway, let's just tear it down and start over again fresh. And I think, and maybe, you know, this already is allowed to happen, they should be able to tear down the house, heal up the site, because it's going to take them 1 year to 2 years to get through the process to even submit for a building permit once they've gone through the design process, selecting the architect and the contractor and all that stuff, and permits are going to take 6 months or more. So, you know, if that happens already, then great. I think we should, you know, allow that to happen. But I think, you know, they should be allowed to demo, heal the site, and if there's a, you know, a construction mitigation process for that, I think there should be, as a matter of fact. And then they have to go through a second construction mitigation plan for the house that they want to build.
Is that what it is now?
What's that?
That's the code now.
Well, again, he's talking about, because when you talk about healing the site, what they're doing is then they come in, while they're healing the site, they'll come in with their permits. You're talking about when there's a gap in between, but that's not usually what happens.
Yeah.
What usually happens is they'll scrape the site and then they'll have their building permit while that's going on. And when we're doing the building permit, we're doing the noticing. And so then all this stuff is overlapping each other.
I do get that, but I'm talking about there's a gap in between. Because if they have just had an accident, they need, you know, and their house is not livable and they just want to start over again. If they haven't even selected an architect, that can take 2 to 3 months. And they got to get a builder. And again, get plans done, it might be another 6 to 8 months to a year.
Would this solve it?
So-
per situs or per tax parcel ID number, you can only get one construction mitigation plan per year.
No, that won't work.
So
Because if somebody has multiple projects going on, that may actually be separated because they're small
Well,
projects.
if they're,
Yeah.
okay, but so you don't get that. I mean, I'm trying to find a way to, but again, it might be so one-off, but you could, if you only got one a year, you would have to say, okay, these 5 projects are part of this mitigation, because this is your 2018. And then if you wanted to do more, you have to go start over with a whole new mitigation plan if you've got 5 projects in 2019.
So one of the things, if you go and take a look on page, well, I don't have a page number. If you go and look under phase construction 20.54.090, and this got to one of the things that's kind of come up from some other stuff. It talks about under A, construction on site involving multiple phases, because again, Mark, you're describing multiple phases in your situation there, shall be combined as a single project for purposes of determining the type of construction mitigation plan, for identifying construction impacts, and for evaluating and imposing mitigation measures. For purposes of this chapter, multiple phases means all construction activity on a site while construction permits are active and includes all construction activity while construction permits were active within 9 months prior to submitting for a construction permit. So if somebody truly is going to separate things out further apart, then they could do that and it wouldn't be a problem. But this is the scenario I keep telling you, because what often happens is they demo, but then they're in here getting their permits while that demo's going on, and then the residents are going, how were they able to start? Because there was no noticing, because it was a demo, so it was a code of conduct, and there's no noticing, and yet they've started doing all this work on the project.
No, I totally agree with that policy that you have.
So we put a piece in here that says, okay, if you separate it by more than 9 months, then they're treated independent of each
Yeah.
other.
That's what I'm,
Yeah, so there is something that actually kind of addresses
but
the
what
other
if it's 8
scenario.
months?
You can set whatever you want to set the numbers here. You can make it
But-
2 months if you want to. I just put 9 months as what I thought was reasonable, but
Yeah.
you guys can set it whatever you want
Yeah.
to. So, yeah. This is one of the reasons why I drafted this up, because it does help in these conversations as you're looking through these other
Yeah.
things.
Okay.
Because it is a good point, and it's been an issue, but that's the other side of it, has been the neighbors going, why didn't we know about this demo happening?
Yeah.
And, sort of a comment, would your issue be addressed if, in the emergency situation, we have a tree fall, you have two choices. One is to restore it to the way it was, just fix, put the roof back on or whatever. You've got that, or you can scrape it under the emergency thing, but then you have to wait. And that's only, well, if you have an emergency, you can take and put it back the way it was, or you can scrape it and then start your process of going through the other, bringing on new permits.
Within 9 months, we've already got it.
Did you, was part of your little proposal there to wait a period of time, or it sounded like you started to say that and then you pulled it back, and I'm not clear.
So in this, that, you've already got an emergency in there.
Mhm.
That's a real emergency, right? I'm sure people will come up with fake emergency, like the roof is leaking or something like that. But a real emergency, a substantive thing, then you can put it back the way it was, or scrape it and then put the things in. Otherwise, you need to wait. Then you get, what's an emergency and what's not. You need to have something that's, not just the roof leaking or the,
Well, and that would
be wood rot.
His situation actually was not a real emergency. A real emergency usually means there's a safety issue or an imminent threat, and it wasn't an emergency situation. Emergency would be the earlier thing where there's an earthquake, and then, like I said, then we start relaxing everything. When that stuff like that happens, we actually start relaxing everything, because it's getting safety is the first priority. But your situation you gave was not an emergency situation. They couldn't occupy the house. They actually could have occupied the house with a couple of fixes and stuff, but the house was actually never at any risk of being a safety threat. It was just opened up, and water got in there, which isn't good, but that's not a safety threat.
Yeah.
So it actually wasn't an emergency situation. I'm thinking through this.
No, it wasn't an emergency situation, but the house was unlivable, and no one was going to live in it, and so the city and the neighbors were stuck with an empty house for several years, and.
But they could have made it livable in less than a month if they'd wanted to, but they chose not to because they wanted to scrape the house. So that was a decision they made to do it,
Yeah.
not because of the city. It's a decision that they made. They
Okay.
had a choice.
I understand that, but the citizens around there then had to live with that.
It's no different than if the person on the other side of you
What
just decided to leave their house tomorrow and just let it sit there for 2, 3, 4 years, as long as they're paying taxes.
It's too ugly to live there.
Yeah, it's just, we don't
It's
live
just
there
that we
anymore.
don't like it, and that's kind of,
Don't even
something
need a
somebody
tree.
can do.
The council is thinking about changing that too.
There's discussion on that, yes. That's a separate thing.
But too ugly to live there.
Well, that you have to live in your house? You can't go on vacation?
Huh?
No, they can't write laws like that. But that discussion's coming up, but where it's going to go, we don't know yet. It's right now early.
People buying houses and not moving into them.
Yeah, but there's nothing you can do.
I'm guilty of that one. It took me 18 months to get a permit.
But you intended to, I think the point is, there's lots of people
Still,
with no intention
Well,
to.
no, there was a point where we almost gave up.
And it's not, and we have had people come in with the intention, and then something happens, and then they end up, it doesn't work out. So even that gets to be a challenge, because I've known at least one or two situations where they were planning to move in, family emergency, they had to leave the country to where their family was located, and they didn't come back for 2 years.
Back on the point about phase projects and kind of like, if that, is that okay?
You got the floor.
So, I appreciate your commentary on the emergency permits. There's actually a lot of ground that people could try to exploit, and that would be a very bad unintended consequence. But regarding like the phased construction projects, and right now, if you're planning on building the house, you have to do it all at once. But the stories I've heard are there have been large projects that get the one construction mitigation plan, but then proceed for years. Now, for some of these projects that are taking more than like 18 months, is a phased construction mitigation plan where we have one for the demolition and then one later on, so that it's
Those aren't
not.
actually phased.
It's still one construction mitigation plan, it's just for all
I'm
the
using the
phases.
wrong term. I'm trying to introduce a new concept that might also address what he was discussing about the demolition of a house. Would it be of public benefit on some of these larger projects? So there's a special plan just for the demolition, and considering that it's such a big scale, it actually takes a few years before the construction begins, and then you revisit with a new construction mitigation plan after the demolition plan. I think as a means of actually responding to the community a little bit more, because some of the, like, such a big project over such a long time period, maybe having just one at the beginning and that is not.
Can I ask a clarification?
I'm brainstorming.
Yeah,
so like I don't even know how
asking
to
a
clarify.
clarification, because I think we may have covered what you're talking about.
Sorry.
That's why I want to clarify, because or you may have a couple of concepts going on here. So one of the things was this whole thing about demo, and then they come back 2 years later. Well, that was the phasing thing, and we talked about that 9-month piece. There is a current way of trying to approach it. You can change whatever the period is on that. That's one thing, versus where you have the construction projects that actually take 2 to 3 years. It's not because they start and stop, it's just because the projects are that big that they take 2 to 3 years. So I'm trying to make sure, are you trying to draw a distinction between those, or are these overlapping, or what exactly?
I'm thinking out loud.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, is that a different concept we need to be considering? Because some of these projects are so big and take such a long time. Is it serving the community well just to have one construction mitigation plan at the beginning? Or is that something that needs to be revisited?
It's an interesting thought, because I can see where some of these bigger houses, you know, when the public gets tired of them, they might want to come back and revisit that and say, hey, I'm tired of living at this construction for 2 years. You know, maybe there's something else.
Stop building?
Yeah, but there's not,
What are you
that's
gonna
not
tell them to do?
grounds
Stop
for,
building? Build faster?
just because people are tired of it is not grounds to require a new construction mitigation plan. You actually have to base it on impacts, and people being tired of it is not considered an impact that you can actually mitigate for.
My point is almost more like maybe the people that it started with, there's new people now. For the stories I heard about some of the bigger projects that happened in the last, 15 years.
Well, we had one where it's over there, they've got a little sliver of waterfront, and all they got was the foundation, and then it went bankrupt, and they actually come back here and start over the whole new plan. They were in front of us, it was right before you got here,
Yeah, it's because it's steep slopes.
and then they finished it. They're just now finishing it.
But I think
so-
that's different than what she's talking about.
Well, that would be starting and then not finishing or taking so long. The only thing I can see is, because you can't, I'm, once they get the ability to build a project, part of the construction mitigation plan, does it have a time frame in it?
So one of the things we did with this, in this draft, we're actually jumping into the draft, not the policy questions, was actually looking at duration, and having them actually identify how long their projects are anticipated to take, and that actually could be a factor as to what level construction mitigation is being triggered. You actually, if you had a chance to look through here, you'll see in some of the criterias, that was to account for that some of these projects can last a long time. So they may be only $750,000, which I haven't really heard this happening and then taking 3 years. But if it was to be the case, then, you know, we would trigger it into a level 3, and if we go to 1, 2, 3, it would be a level 3 tailored construction mitigation plan.
I was wondering what, so I haven't been here long enough to have personal experience with this, but on the couple of construction mitigation plans that I've been part of a hearing on, I had the impression that if the plan that was adopted became burdensome or bothersome, that citizens always have the opportunity to come back and say that it's bothersome.
No.
So I guess my question is...
It's not bothersome,
No.
it's if they're breaking the rules.
Well,
Right.
oh, okay. So
Yeah.
for instance, one of the projects that we approved, we granted additional construction. We extended the construction hours a little bit. And that's a thing, that's an instance where I could see that, you know, the neighbors didn't object because they sort of thought that maybe 6:30 in the morning wasn't going to be so awful, and then it turns out that they just can't stand having that much noise, you know, the extended hours. Is there any mechanism in the current code for amending a construction mitigation plan?
You really don't know.
And actually letting the residents do that is a big problem legally. So that's one of the reasons too why we've been actually tightening that up, because where you go is just don't allow it in the first place.
Well, it just seems to me from a citizen's point of view, sometimes you don't realize what you're signing up for, and a year or two down the road and this project's still going on, and I don't know, maybe it's, you know, having lived close to the 520 construction, I know you do get worn out, and the other time you get worn out is if this next door neighbor has a 2-year project, and then the one behind you has another 2-year project, and the one next to you has a 2-year, you know, so you're living with construction for 6 years in a row, and it just seems there should be some way to provide some relief.
Yeah, you're dealing in a very, as you may recall from the meeting, the last meeting with the hearing examiner, when you're dealing at permit levels, which is what construction mitigation plans are, you're dealing with the law. You're not dealing with policy or aspirational things. You're actually dealing with what the law allows for. And the reason I bring that up is because the way it sets up is once you've got the permits and the conditions in there, you can't go back in and start changing those conditions and stuff unless it's like an enforcement issue or something like that. You can't go back in necessarily and start requiring because people object. Now, if you identify new impacts, like, right, if you write and make sure you write your criteria to do this, if your criteria says, like, you know, if new impacts are identified, that then you can add additional conditions, which we do often put in those CMPs, then we can look to add additional conditions that way. But you have to identify an impact, and it can't be just because people are objecting. It has to be something specific, like, for example, to what you were talking about, if, and I like using this because this has come up, where somebody had a child, maybe they moved in there with a child that needs actually to have a quiet period. And so now they come in here and talk to us. So that might be, if we have conditions in it that says we can modify those hours because of new circumstances or something like that, then that might be a condition that we might be able to. And even that, you got to be careful, because if the applicant objects, you could still even run into potential legal issues with it. Because once the way the Washington courts look at it is once you issue a permit, predictability is paramount for the applicant wants to move forward. And that's more unique in Washington, because other places, other states have different ways they deal with the vesting and stuff. And in our state, we have what's called minority vesting, and essentially it's predictability once the permit's out.
That might argue, I'm sorry, I'll just respond, and then that might argue for thinking more about Nicole's idea about a phased, you know, or a series.
You need to open your mail, is what it means. And that's the biggest part is when you get these notices, is read them and go to the meetings. And that's what the people are, you know, all of a sudden, we didn't have it. Yes, you did. I mean, and we hear that, you know, I've heard it a bunch of times. People say, well, and we're like, remember the little cards you got? Oh yeah, I threw it in the garbage. Well, it told you when to go make your objections.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking more about, you know, the conscientious citizen who opened their mail and came to the meeting and thought that, you know, things would be okay, but then the project gets, I don't know, I'm thinking out loud too.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll
Yeah,
think about it
yeah.
some more and come back.
Well, and let me just note this thing too, because one of the things in looking at trying to do revisions in here is actually putting some new requirements on these projects for better planning. And one of those things, for example, is, and if you look through here, there's a thing about a communication plan being required as a new requirement that talks about methods for communicating with neighbors about the project, and then also the thing about when there's disruptions and stuff like that. So, and how they're going to. So one of the things that's being thought out here is in the future requiring these construction mitigation plans to be more thought out detail. Going to Mark's comment kind of earlier, what we hear often is, well, we don't necessarily know until later on, but that's honestly, you can, if you want to go that way, you can, but what I constantly hear is I don't think people really care. They want the contractors to be thinking their stuff out, whatever it takes to do that, and they're capable of doing it and thinking it out and then bringing that information so that people aren't necessarily surprised by what's going on with the project. So one of the thoughts here is having a communication plan as part of their mitigation so that we actually, when you're evaluating it, we know how they're going to go about communicating with the neighbors and actually can hold them to those communication plans as a condition of their permit. So there's some things trying to improve some of those areas. It doesn't necessarily still get you, though, if they communicate, and if the person just is tired of it and wants to object, that's not going to get them anywhere, because that's not going to be a grounds for doing anything. Mark?
Okay, speaking to that subject of communication, I'm going to try to give an example, and I want to find out if this is what you're talking about. This is kind of a combination of different circumstances, but years and years ago, before you guys were born, there was a case that I heard.
Before we were born?
Yeah. I'm being facetious on that. But we had a case where we had a CMP up on 84th, brand new house is being built, and they were on a lane, and on the lane there was a young family that had a brand new baby that had a health issue, and they were not sure what was the needs might be. They had to, run to the hospital at all times of the day and night to take care of this baby that was in need. And luckily, this came to the light of the Planning Commission during the CMP hearing, and we were able to make arrangements with this contractor that he would, they were digging utilities in this small little lane, and so the contractor said, I can accommodate that because I'll have a steel plate and I'll have somebody always in the ready. If you come and you need to get to the hospital, we'll drag that steel plate and cover that hole so you can get down there right away. Okay, they were lucky because they brought that information to the CMP hearing. Now, what if that baby was born after the CMP hearing and then they found that out? Would they have the opportunity to come back and change that CMP so that could happen again? And is that what you're talking about, is communication?
Yeah, so, I mean, because most contractors, if they learn of those situations, at least my experience, and you can say, Mark, if you had it different, because you've dealt probably with more contractors than I have, but most contractors, when they learn of those things, are pretty willing to accommodate, because if for no other reason, they don't want to look bad. I mean,
right.
If you want to look at it from a selfish perspective, but most of them are usually pretty open to those things. So yeah, so going to the point, the communication, the idea here is, because going to a little bit further back, they got a notice in there that they saw, but the idea here is that the contractor has to be more proactive in their communicating with the residents, not necessarily the other way around. So that's one of the ideas about the communication plan, is it's just talking about the contractor, what are they going to do to communicate with people around them, so it's putting the burden more on them to communicate, and then, yeah, if something comes up, hoping that actually will resolve. But if it doesn't, the resident will know about it. In that situation, they can come in and talk to the city, and we can certainly lean on them. But again, I think my experience is usually when most people find out about these things, they do try to accommodate to the extent that they can. They won't necessarily stop a project, right? They won't say, no, we're not going to do the project, but what they'll do is they'll try to come up with a solution that works best for everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
It's very late in the evening, but that's counter to my personal experience, unfortunately. But I don't want to open this whole can of worms right now. If there were actually something codified regarding updates to CMPs in a specific situation like that, instead of just relying and hoping that the contractor is a good person, it would help the community a lot more.
Could you ever,
Like an update to
You
the ability
can't-
to
The problem, you have to allow the contractors to, you can't leave them with an open door. As much as you want to have this, I mean, we all want to see, especially little babies, go to the hospital. But you can't just tell the contractors, oh, if you go build a Medina, well, we're going to give you a set of rules and a set of guidelines and this, but we might change it in the middle.
What you can do though, and we do actually, with mitigation measures in there in your conditions, is you can say if there's new impacts identified, you can potentially require and at least give you some leverage to work with somebody. Again, you gotta be careful because there are laws that surround this stuff, but again, my experience has been generally when there's been an identified impact, like what Mark described, then you usually will find them, most of the contractors usually accommodating when they're made aware of it.
if
And I
it's
know, and I
possible to
understand
put-
your situation,
Yeah,
and there's a whole
I-
bunch of other things with that, but, yeah, so.
If it could get codified though, in any capacity, because first and foremost, the city's here to protect the health and safety of its people, not the ability to create a project if it's physically endangering to certain vulnerable members of the community. I'm sorry, like that's where I believe, and I believe that.
I think that's, a really valid concern.
What's the very essence
My
of it?
question is, how can you cover everything that could
Right.
happen? Because you don't want, there's a lot of issues that might come up that who's gonna think about.
Oh,
Yeah,
No,
somebody-
I'm just saying some capacity for flexibility, because right now we're reliant on the goodwill of contractors.
Well, the other thing you run into on all this though as well is that you also get people that will make speculation on things, and that's one of the things you run into as well. So that's why we try to do what we can as much as possible up front in terms of identifying, and then there's also things that can be outside of the city's authority. And I'm going to use the example of air pollution as one of those. Air pollution is not something the city regulates. That's actually state and it's the health district and folks like that. So there's things that we can do and there's things that we can't do. And then you do run into things like, for example, when there's air quality things that come out, like when we had the pollution this last summer with the fires and stuff like that, right? So we have to rely on the agencies that have authority that then say, okay, this is the restrictions in place, and that's what we end up following. Is it always sufficient for everybody? No, because those rules don't go that deep for whether it's political or whatever. But so the city has certain responsibilities, other agencies have certain responsibilities, and then also citizens themselves have certain responsibilities too. It's kind of actually a shared thing with everybody.
Yes, Mark.
And they get tired of me. I've experienced, like Laurel's example, where you have several houses under construction, they all start, at different times, and all of a sudden you're living in a construction zone for 6-8 years. Is it possible that we could put a moratorium in certain neighborhoods on construction to limit that impact to the neighbors?
Go to the Monday study session, they will talk
That
about
word.
moratorium on
So-
Monday.
I did this on
Moratorium.
purpose to bring up that subject, but
Go
Laura,
to,
I think
go to
brought
the
up a
meeting
good
on
point.
Monday. I'm not going to answer that tonight.
On that point, just a quick aside, Bellevue actually does have a crane restriction in place to limit the impact to specific zones. So it is something that's within the realm of Washington state law. You can say, this is too much for one area, we're going to limit it, you have to wait in line.
Well, you talked about cranes, which is different than actual construction in general. If you don't need a crane, you could still do your construction.
I'm saying the general concept, so it's not totally outside the realm of Washington law.
Right, but you have to understand, and I can take a guess on why they did it. You have to understand that the conditions on what they did that were probably based on you can't have multiple cranes because they're going to probably run into each other. So there's things that they would base that
You
on.
can't tell someone you can buy this property, oh, no, you're 12th in line, you can build in 2050.
Although I have been told, to what her point though, I have been told Bellevue does that, but it's not necessarily legal, but they have done that to contractors there. Alex has mentioned that to me, but I don't think they actually have grounds to do it, but people don't want to make them mad, and so,
Because then you gotta buy another park.
yeah, or whatever it is, because of the way their stuff
More
goes, or
local
you're gonna have a
housing.
big fight and they just want to get their projects done.
Yes, and that's.
So,
The extortion just gets dramatic.
yeah, so they use a lot of the weight of contractors wanting to get things done as quick as they can so they can get onto their next project as a way to leverage things. We don't quite have that same leverage here. People want to get their stuff done, but it's not because they're trying to run on to the next project.
So once you got through your 6 years, how many years was it for the next project? See, like for us, I've seen, what is it, 6 of the houses around us. Now there's kind of nothing for even on the board.
Yeah, it goes through phases in certain parts of the community.
I mean, it's, you know, and
78th Place for the last, since I've been here, has been under construction almost the entire time I've been here, up and down that street. 14th now seems to be a big focus going on right now. Overlake seems to cover, as long as I can remember, there's always been homes along Overlake, but that's also a longer stretch. It just seems like there's always this concentration for whatever reason, because I think that's when properties go up for sale. I guess the neighbor sells and other neighbors decide to sell, and then you see these projects come in and after property sells.
Could I just take this discussion one level higher? So the only other thing I wanted to mention is that there has been discussion in the past about, well, should the Planning Commission even conduct the CMPs, or should it be with a hearing examiner? I just wanted to get a sense from the group where we personally stood, and then I'll tell you where I stand.
And that goes to Cindy's thing I mentioned earlier on.
We've done this in the past where we've expressed our opinion. Maybe we could.
I'll start. No, it's good, and I'll even start. I see it as the one easy, accessible way for the public to talk to the contractors, which is kind of what you're saying. So right at the beginning, when it has to be done legally, you come in and I'm pregnant. You know, what can you do to help me with this? Or I have a special needs baby. You have the contractors right there, and we're here, and all the diverse personalities are going to vote to do something or to accommodate that. Moving the dumpster, well, they threw a tantrum, but we moved the dumpster because these people said it was by their bedroom window and these ones was kitchen window. It's like, we move it to the other side. Yes, we can. And that's when this happens, and that's why I believe that we need to be the ones doing this, because you get the judge advocate, he's going to be, okay, law 1, okay, all these laws were passed, go build your house. And it's not that he doesn't care. Tomorrow he's in Clyde Hill, the next day he's over in Yarrow Point, where we're part of a community, and a piece of what we do is, no, but it is be part of the community. This is the one part of the construction mitigation plan that I've always tried to defend, is it's the only time the public gets to meet the contractors.
Maybe I'm confused about the procedure, but it seems to me that in a hearing examiner hearing, that could also happen, couldn't it?
But it's not as informal. We're peers. I mean, when we're done with this, we could be sitting out there, and then building the next house next to you, and you know how it works now, so you're in the audience, and you're talking to whomever the chair is, and you say these things.
I think one thing that gave me pause in that email was that we're one of the few cities, I guess, that does it this way, and I wondered, why are we an outlier? What's the
Well, we're one of the few
legal...
cities that do construction mitigation plans, period. I don't know actually anybody else that has this program. That's actually unique to Medina.
It started when your husband, I think, was on council. And,
Yes.
And,
Early 90s.
The hearing examiner process.
oh, no,
No.
just the CMP process.
Oh, the CMP process.
Yeah,
Oh.
is that what you're talking about? I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
I was talking about the CMP process, but when you referred to that prior council, what I remember is that there was a process, or that everything came to the Planning Commission, but around that time frame, for the first time, some decisions started to be sent to a hearing examiner
Right,
instead.
That was early 2000.
But I thought you were wondering, why did we even come up with a CMP process when no other city had it?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. What I meant to say was, my understanding from that recent email was that, and I didn't realize that not many cities have a CMP process at all, but I thought the email was saying that of the cities that do, it's pretty much all hearing examiner
Yeah,
decision
what
these
they're
days.
talking about is, most jurisdictions, but not all, Clyde Hill's an example, they still use a Board of Adjustment in Clyde Hill. And some, smaller towns, use Board of Adjustment, some mix, like I know Snohomish County, well, when I was there, and that was 10 years ago, they still actually had some permits that actually still went to their council and stuff like that. Most jurisdictions, a lot of jurisdictions have moved everything to hearing examiner, that's quasi-judicial. But it's also not uncommon to see a mix depending on what the stuff is. Medina, I think, had hearing examiner, got away, and then went back to it because we had a tendency to end up in court on almost all of our special use permits. And even the historical use permit for the Green Store ended up in court. We paid $600,000 out on that one. So they moved all those things to hearing examiner for less difficulty. CMPs have never ended up in court as far as I'm aware of, because we got some protections in place. But
I do seem to recall some planning commission members in that time frame talking about it having sort of evolved from a neighbor-to-neighbor discussion to an army of attorneys, with some sort of little bit overwhelming, the planning commission, not feeling as confident in their own legal training or whatever, and that so there being sort of a change in the balance if someone comes in with all lawyered up or whatever, so.
I think you're talking about the Board of Adjustment.
Maybe I'm
They dropped the
confused.
Board of Adjustment in favor of hearing examiner for that. That was one of the reasons,
Okay.
in addition to what Robert was saying too.
Okay.
So Laura, are you pro or con?
You didn't, maybe I don't have
Just
really
right now,
strong feeling.
okay.
I think right now I'm probably pro hearing examiner.
Okay.
I think it falls within I believe the construction mitigation plan falls within the purview of the planning commission. It's a nice degree of flexibility that we have.
Randy?
Well, I'm with
Oh, I already
Sean.
did.
I'm
I
with
did
Sean. Originally, I thought I was questioning, whether we were doing too many, and there were moments when I felt like maybe we weren't adding that much value. But then I saw miracles happen when people, through this process, people were talking, and we did catch some things. And I feel it's a really important role that the Planning Commission has. I'm very much in favor of keeping that as one of our functions.
I guess I do have a little bit more. We've evolved. I mean, we used to, we were talking about the trucks and what about this, and it was, an hour or so just talking about trucks and where they go. Well, then these are the paths. We got it just to where, okay, that's just done. Christina comes in now, and the trucks go. Then it was school. What about kids? And the school, that was when you started, yeah. And we had these ridiculous discussions about, should it be, now that's just part of it. When she comes in here, we now have the school mitigation part. Before school, after school, it's just part of her component. And so as we learn, we discuss and argue, and it doesn't always go well, but it gets done. And then we're evolving the code or evolving the expectation of these construction mitigation plans. And I don't know that anyone else wouldn't they're not going to evolve it and make it more stringent or make it work better for Medina. They're just going to do what they have to and get to the next one.
Well, I think this concept of moving to the hearing examiner is a solution without a problem. Because as I understand it, that there are issues that need to go to the hearing, maybe conditional use permit. There may be some things that should, but it seems to me that they're talking about everybody has it. That's not true, number one. And number two, Medina, I think, is very different in some respects. We're not Bellevue, we're not Redmond, we're not areas that still have large development and land use issues and things like that. And I think that I fully agree with Randy. I think it's a chance for the community to have some input and to make those adjustments before construction starts. And I don't know whether that's true. I've not been to a hearing examiner, but I did ask Robert if how many of these decisions that the planning commission has made on CMPs have actually gone to the hearing examiner? What I hear you saying is that's,
Just the one, 520, and we actually settled it before we even got to the appeal hearing on it.
so that's a pretty good record. So I say, I don't think we have a problem, so why are we doing this?
And they only do a bridge every 50 years.
They what?
They only build a bridge every
No,
50
the next
years.
one's 80 years.
Well, 80 years this time.
So that's my opinion. I would vote with staying away from the hearing. Another thing, you've got more time and more money for applicants, don't you? Because if you go.
The hearing examiner is actually more expensive.
That's what I'm saying. You know, I don't know about the time, but certainly it's an additional cost to
Time's
the
about the
applicant.
same. I think the time's the same, but it's more expensive for the hearing examiner because we charge an extra $2,500.
And that's another piece too, so. Where I am.
Mark? I used to be in favor of going to the hearing examiner system after being on the council and worrying about liability and you know, the cost of hiring attorneys to defend the city and, you know, managing the budget. That, you know, that seemed to be more of a higher concern, just, you know, managing that. But after hearing Nicole's very eloquent, passionate speech to the council 2 nights ago, I have now become a believer that, I agree with almost everybody else here, that I think we need to keep it in the community, and I like the flexibility and getting neighbors to talk to other neighbors and so forth. I think it's a really good process, and I think it's a real positive for our community, so I'm in favor of keeping it here. I'd like to streamline it a little bit more. So it doesn't take an hour to go through.
It's much better, way better than when I started. I mean, we used to start where we're talking about cranes, we're talking about roads, and we'd hear ourselves talking about something, well, can't we just say these are the rules? And again, trucks was ridiculous, and that's gone. School, I mean, we've got a lot of evolution in this, and it is streamlined, it is much, but it seems like every time we streamline it, we find something else to start chewing on.
So, if you will indulge me, I actually, in the preparation for my public comments to the city council, in favor of maintenance of a public voice and a planning commission on these quasi-judicial matters, I did write something, and I would love to read it to you guys for your hearing enjoyment. I'll keep it just to these words. All right. Please indulge me. All right. A jury of your peers, a concept dating to the Magna Carta and preserved in the American legal tradition with our 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments, is a fundamental concept in the American system of jurisprudence. The U.S. Supreme Court noted in the importance of the jury right in its 1968 ruling of Duncan versus Louisiana. In Duncan, the court said, providing an accused with the right, or let me skip, provides a safeguard against the corrupt or overzealous prosecutor and against the compliant, biased, or eccentric judge. So the most local level of government, our city, the voice of the people must be preserved. The city affects our daily lives, our health, and our happiness more than any other level of government. If this basic concept, decisions made by your peers and fellow citizens cannot be carried through the ages, cannot be preserved at the local level, where is this revered concept safe? In the granting of permits and construction mitigation, a fair bit of municipal code and the city plan is open for interpretation by community members themselves, not by an unelected third party. Would a hearing examiner who resides primarily in downtown San Diego, presiding on matters in our fair city, adequately assess what a Medina citizen finds as a nuisance? How do you interpret unreasonably annoys, injures, or interferes with endangers the comfort, repose, health, or safety of a community or neighborhood? How does a non-community member evaluate the high-quality residential character of our city? The letter that was quoted that was presented to us, you should note that it's from the Washington City's Insurance Authority. These are insurance defense lawyers. Their job is to mitigate risk. That's their primary objective. The letter represents the municipal insurance defense interests, not necessarily the interests of the residents of Medina. The WCIA defense attorney letter doesn't mention statistics regarding appeal of decisions made by a hearing examiner holding up in court. In lieu of statistics, opinions are offered, like a cursory review will find that our filings are readily confirmed. And those with the fewer legal challenges are made to hearing examiners are more frequently upheld by the appellate courts. The people appealing these decisions are primarily developers, not necessarily citizens. So what actually ends up happening is even if you do get less appeals, it's because the people you've removed a voice from them. Moreover, the WCIA defense attorney letter was dated 2014. It cites Mercer Island as an example of a city that's transitioned from the community board to a hearing examiner. Interestingly, the city of Mercer Island has now endured so much impact from construction and development whilst under the watch of a hearing examiner. They were compelled to enact an emergency building moratorium this past year. Was the discretion of the Mercer Island hearing examiner more likely to favor the community's interests or the development's interests? And what was the result? Removing the important community consideration of the Planning Commission in these matters transfers the burden of ensuring health, safety, and happiness from the city to individual community members. If there's a land use action causing problems to community members, instead of engaging with a panel of their peers in a community discussion without legal escalation, they must expend considerable time, energy, and money to find a lawyer and formally appeal the decision. This would deprive real people in the community of their rights and voice and disenfranchise people by the creation of undue hardship in order to execute these rights. I think I was writing during the meeting, so it's a little long-winded. But basically, I think we have to remember who was writing that letter. It's the insurance agency for our city. If we lead by fear of litigation and not by fear of a vision for the future, I mean, we don't have a beach, we don't have play structures, we don't have an off-leash dog park, we don't have all of the things that makes Medina wonderful, because all of those things bring risk and liability. So it's our job to protect what does make Medina wonderful and not just always be concerned about the liability of things, because that would be a very, very sad world to live in. So I feel very, very strongly on the topic. And thank you for listening to my
Hear, hear.
Long explanation.
Let me give you the professional thoughts on this stuff. And I was talking to Daniel here earlier about it because I'm just going to take you back real quick to the hearing examiner. And the fact is that when you're dealing with quasi-judicial, when you're dealing with permits, you have to deal with the law, right? It's not about the community's aspirations anymore at that point. You have to deal specifically with the law. This is why, though, I think the Planning Commission, and I've voiced this to some of you before, and I've actually said it to council members before, why I think actually the way it's set up with the Planning Commission here in the construction mitigation plans actually is an advantage. And that's because with staff, same thing with hearing examiner, we are more limited to having to follow the law. That's what our professional ethics requires to do. It's what we're required to do. The nice thing that you guys can do is you can wander all over the place, and you do. You know, you guys know over the history, sometimes Planning Commission members have ventured into areas that have nothing to do with construction mitigation plan and have wanted to throw things out there that could be very problematic. But having said that, here's the beauty of what you guys do, and this is what I hope you guys take to heart on all of this. The beauty of it is that you can actually ask an applicant anything. It doesn't matter. You can ask them anything as far as providing something. They can say yes or no. If they don't object, even if it's something you probably couldn't require normally, but if they don't object, you've just achieved something there that staff here and examiner can't do, because we stick much more strictly to the law.
Like moving a dumpster.
Right. On the other hand, if the applicant does object, then we tend to walk you through it, and then you guys got to kind of work through those things. And even if you do cross over and make a wrong decision, which did happen with the 520, you guys got a little bit caught up in the politics on it, if you recall.
I don't think any of us were here then.
Yeah, a lot of you guys, some of you were here. You were on the Planning Commission when that happened. The 520 revision to the CMP, it happened about 3-4 years ago. Anyway, it did cross a line. We told you at the time, you guys still voted the way you did. It's fine. And the reason why I bring this up is not to criticize or anything, but the thing is, there was an adequate protection in place, and that is we have appeals of the Planning Commission go to the hearing examiner. So the nice thing is that you guys actually have a lot of room to work with, even if it's not necessarily always correct in terms of the looks of the law. But you have that room to work with, and we always have going to the WCIA's concern, we have a check in place that always can work through those issues. So I think the nice thing is that you guys can do things that we can't as staff do. You can ask things, and like you mentioned, you can get people together in these meetings. We try to do that as staff, but people try to hide behind us a lot more on one side or the other, where when they're out here in the hearing and you guys are here, there's not any really hiding or anything like that. And so I actually think there's a big advantage to the Planning Commission doing the tailored construction, or if we're going to call them level 3s, whatever. I think there's actually been a big advantage to these bigger projects that you guys actually hear those, because there's things you can do and ask for, and there's checks in place. Even when it crosses lines, there's checks in place that protect the city that otherwise we can't do. So that's what I would, in making your arguments, those are the things that I would recommend to you going forward, because hearing examiner can't do some of the things that you guys can do, because he's going to stick to, or she's going to stick much closer to the law, just like staff tends to do the same thing. You guys can kind of fudge a little bit more, and it's perfectly fine, and it's okay, because the applicant has a choice to say yea or nay, and then you just go from there with it, depending on what they say. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's why I've actually argued to keep you guys in the level 2. When I first got here, I was the other way around. I just thought, all that stuff, but it's one of the things you learn after you do these for a while. You actually see there is a big advantage. I don't agree with that with other types of land use permits, but construction mitigation plans are unique, and they are, honestly, having community input on those is probably more valuable than actually on some of the other things that are out there. Other things are valuable too, don't get me wrong, but I think those you do got to stick more legally. With the construction mitigations, it's a little bit more of a personal thing for most people, and I think it works well this way. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on it. So whoever replaces me is going to have to learn, will have to learn those lessons, and you guys certainly can teach them.
So the current code requires some decisions to go to the hearing examiner, right?
Almost all of them, almost all quasi-judicial decisions. The only things that do not are level 2 tailored construction mitigation plans, site plan reviews, which honestly, that's got to go away someday and be totally changed, because the way it's currently configured, it's not very well set up. And then the other things are actually by state law, which are site-specific rezones, and that's state law that requires those. And trying to think, I think it's final preliminary plats. Preliminary plats can go to a planning commission or a hearing examiner for recommendation, but council has to decide preliminary plats. Those are state laws. But other than that, everything else we have other than construction mitigation and site plan do actually go to hearing examiner.
But the subset of construction mitigation plans that go to the hearing examiner currently.
The level 2s do the high end, the top end of the biggest projects go to the planning commission. The rest of them are staff. And that's part of the efficiency is why they came up with that.
Are you talking about
Yep.
appeals in the CMP?
No, maybe I'm confused. I thought that the sort of the largest, for lack of a better word, level of construction mitigation plan under the current code went to the hearing examiner.
No, they come to you. The only time, what construction mitigation plans do go to the hearing examiner is when an applicant comes in with like a special use permit. If they consolidate those, because that is an option they have, then those get sent together, will get sent to the hearing examiner. So for example, you can expect St. Thomas to probably come in with their construction mitigation plan, will probably come in with their building permit and their special use permits. And if that happens, you will not see their construction mitigation plan. That construction mitigation plan will end up going to the hearing examiner. And in that case, it's probably a good thing, because so many of you have been involved with the decision making, and the appearance of fairness on it could be a challenge otherwise. But that's the other thing, is if there is an issue like that, we can always make a decision to send something to the hearing examiner too, I think. But no, otherwise they come to you, the level 2s all come to you. And you guys average about, I think, what did we have last year, 6 or 7 of them? You don't have more than 6 or 7 is really actually a high number. I think 3 to 4 is probably typical. So, yeah.
Where we moved from in San San Diego, they were actually moving towards these community boards, and basically every project had to get approval of the community board. My friend, her house had some interesting challenges, but it was important for her to go through. I mean, maybe that's
But that's
on the,
California.
I'm saying, yeah, that's the way other end of things. But it's not, just to bring it back to the, like, all the other cities in this, there were no statistics provided. And Medina isn't like all the other cities. And in other states, it's actually moving toward more planning board decisions than the other way around.
Like I said, Washington State is different from many of the others because of the way our vesting rules and the way our courts have ruled on rights. And honestly, once you get down to the permit level, the applicant has more rights than the community at that point, because the community had its chance when it set the rules and regulations and stuff. So that's actually where the community has its influence under Washington's structure. It's not really, well, the idea of the permitting, all the actual purpose of the permitting is just to identify if there's some other property rights that need to be accounted for. For example, the impact, like, when we talk about construction impact, because people parking in other areas in there, that's an adverse impact created. You have a property right not to necessarily have that happen. So that's why you have the public comment periods made, so people can identify those potential property rights, and then those can be mitigated for through the course of the project. But that's the extent of it. It's not really so the community gets to vote on a project. They don't get to decide whether a project's good or bad once it's at a permit level, but they do get to comment, and they get to have input to try to address mitigation issues, but they don't get to say yay or nay to a project. That's just the reality of it. So anyway, it's kind of getting late.
Hey, Robert, just on for the record, I really wanted to thank you for everything you've done over the years, the amazing staff work. I don't think we've had all these meetings, and we've always had a packet. And that's a remarkable record. I've been in other cities where it's just like clockwork, and that's been greatly appreciated. The stepping into that interim city manager job when you were already doing 5 other jobs was amazing, and I just wanted to, for the community, make sure you were thanked for that, again, on the record, and this and for your insights in these meetings, putting up with us, all these different characters, and your patience, and for your friendships. I just wanted to say those things. And congratulations on your new position. It's really exciting. So
thank you.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thanks a lot. And congratulations. I mean,
Yeah, like I said, I am excited. I am going to miss everybody. I will miss everybody a lot. There's been days when it's been frustrating, but overall, everything actually has always ended up, for the most part, it's always ended up good and fun. So I am going to have a lot of fun memories that I'll take with me for the rest of my life, so, from working here.
need a motion.
Adjourn the meeting.
Second?
Second.
All 4?
Aye.
Opposed?
All right, thank you, everybody.
I was a little more
Notice I didn't bother
eloquent
to
at
reach for
the
it.
city council meeting when I was reading. Trying to speak from my mind.
Yeah.
I feel strongly
The one
about,
thing is that they may hold me on retainer to help with a couple of these things to get finished up.
I feel like
Mike
every
hasn't
step of the way
approached
it's
me
getting
on that,
chipped
but
away
I
from
think
us.
Steve
Like,
I invited
you-
him to this
this
meeting
might have
thing
been
when they had
so
do something up
aware.
that may,
So
that's why
he told,
aware
and
of
told me.
I won't be responsible for any more of these meetings. But,
like, for example,
they
more
may
and more
want me to
things
have
are
something
moving
finished
toward
up like
binding
St.
arbitration.
Paul's,
Like if you
like
sign up
that.
for software.